Welcome to the HighExistence podcast. I am your host, John Brooks, and today is a special podcast for you coming up. This is the longest podcast that I've ever recorded, coming in at 3 hours long. In it, I speak to my fellow team member, Eric Brown. It's sort of like me and Eric hanging out, talking as we always talk, but keeping things relevant to the topics of spirituality and deep work. For a long time, me and Eric have had conversations behind the scenes where we point out one of the traps of spiritual practice, and that is the trap of always wanting to feel good, always wanting to be in a high vibrational state, always wanting to feel present to the moment, always wanting to follow one's bliss, not realizing that actually deep work, right action, getting stuff done, executing regardless of how you feel, using your reason to put one step in front of the other and get stuff done to progress your life, to further your career, is in some ways the ultimate spiritual practice. If you're always chasing that spiritual high and never wanting to actually do things that require you to skip a little bit of sleep, to focus for hours on end, to check off things on your to-do list, you're not really getting it. Now, there is an art to making decisions and listening to your heart and doing things that are in alignment with you. Okay, there's definitely an art to that. But there's also an art in differentiating the things that are according to your nature, the things that you are aligned with, and the things that you just sort of feel like doing or don't feel like doing because of some fleeting emotion or addictive impulse or short-term gratification. This interview is all about how we can become more productive in both our work and in our spiritual practice. The most impressive spiritual practitioners I know are also people who are very productive. And the most impressive entrepreneurs that I know are also people who are very spiritual. Bridging that gap is essential if we want to get the most out of all areas of our life. In this episode, here's just a little glimpse. We talk about Eric's journey from an unpaid intern to an indispensable member of the HighExistence team and what he did to get there. We talk about the value of starting a blog and how you can go about doing it. We discuss how to overcome the fear that we have and the procrastination that we have over putting out our creative work. We talk about the success barriers people have. You know, everyone wants to be successful, but nobody wants to start at the beginning. We talk about how the comfortable good is holding you back from the difficult great. We talk about the incredible but forgotten value of taking part in an apprenticeship. Eric gives a step-by-step approach when it comes to to-do lists, productivity, organizing. He tells you how you can design your own personal optimized productivity system. Eric is one of those guys that always seems to get stuff done. You tell him to read a book or check out a movie or do a task and it gets done. But at the same time, he's always content and happy and has leisure time. It's kind of baffling. Imagine if you could do that. Imagine if you could do everything that you wanted to do in a day and still feel good. We talk about addictions and bad habits and how to replace them with good ones that stick. We talk about apotheosis and meditation and journaling and absolutely everything in between. If any of those subjects sound interesting or captivating to you, I'm sure that you will get a lot out of this episode. So, without further ado, this is me and Eric Brown in discussion. So, Eric, it's been a long time in the making, this episode. I've wanted to talk to you publicly for a long time. I feel like you have very unique perspectives, and not just unique, but useful perspectives that many of the HighExistence readers would derive a lot of value from. What I particularly admire about you is your ability to combine all of the spiritual modalities that we write and teach at HighExistence with a kind of conscientiousness, a productivity mindset, an entrepreneur way of doing things. You're highly efficient, you're very organized, but you also seem to have a big space in your life for going with the flow. So I'd like to start there and just ask you, how do you balance being efficient and productive with being relaxed, chill, and easygoing?
Yeah, thank you for that, man. This has certainly been a long time coming. A lot of my exploration into this world really came out of necessity, right? I was in the corporate world, in startups for a long time, and from there you lean to one side of the pendulum, right? You get, when it's really up to you, you focus on output a lot, right? How much output can you maximize per person? But and we see this happening a lot now. You also get a host of problems that come with that. You get a lot of burnout, you get a lot of morale issues. And so in trying to answer that for myself, the pendulum swung back this way with asking questions of, how do I take care of myself? How do I make sure that I'm doing things outside of work and actually feeling good? And eventually you get into this, the pendulum balances back in the middle in something like balance, or something like going with the flow. Like, I'm going to do my best work in what I have control over, make sure I can maintain that over a long period of time, and then the middle it kind of just comes back to the middle.
Let's go back. You just mentioned that you were involved in startups. How did you get involved in startups? Because I'm not really too familiar with that world. So if you could just explain how you got into that and what that was like, what that entailed, I'd be curious to hear.
Sure. That was really the natural progression of school for me. I did business programs really starting actually in grade 7. I went to these regional programs for middle school and high school that were just business oriented. Went to university for commerce, and it was in university that I kind of gravitated towards startups. My school was really geared towards kind of turning you into like middle managers or like executive team level, and there was a part of me that wanted to see my fingerprints all over whatever it was I was doing, right? If it was a physical product, if it was like a packaged good, or if it was software, right? I wanted to be able to point specifically at something and be like, yeah, I helped make that decision, or I wrote this. My interest was always in marketing and brand, so it was always like, yeah, we made the decisions for this, or I helped push this forward. And I felt like the direction school was pushing me was moving away from that. So I realized that it's like, okay, I have to now carve this for myself, right? Because I'm not going to learn a whole lot of the skills that I might need. I might need to venture into startups, right? If you're a very small team, you kind of have to wear many hats, right? And we were being taught really to wear one or two. Whereas you need some sense of copywriting, of art and creative design, of project management. There's a whole slew of things that come with startup life. But it was beautiful, right? There's this feeling of just a small group of us up against the world, right? No one is going to give us any handouts. No one is going to help us, right? A vast majority of startups fail, right? So it was this beautiful challenge, and it forces you to like rise up into that occasion. It was a huge catalyst for growth, and it just fit nicely. It was this balance of, okay, all of my education is in business and building companies, and a lot of my personal passion was in just feeling like I was creating something, right? And so that led to a lot of the wanting to see my fingerprints on stuff, and startups were just a merging of those two worlds.
From what I know about you now, I see you as someone with tons of different interests, which we're going to get into. So why did you choose business and marketing as the direction that you wanted to go in for a career?
I think there are two main things that come out of that. One is it was fueled a lot by my parents just growing up. So my mom's a doctor and my dad was an entrepreneur. And I really couldn't handle the sight of blood. I did a few take your kids to work days with my mom, and that was difficult to say the least. It just didn't draw me as much. But then I saw my dad do a number of just starting his own companies, building his own teams. We would help him out with trade shows and stuff. And there was that fire that really resonated with me. And then so that was a big one. I really can't understate that. But for a long time when I was growing up, it was I want to make an impact on the world. Right? I think everyone grows up with that drive in them. And so it was just in trying to answer that question, how can I do that? This was we grew up in the time the advent of the internet. You start getting some of these monstrous companies taking shape and profoundly impacting millions and millions of people's lives. And so it was oh, okay, big companies, business is how you make that impact on people. And those two things really just fueled that.
Yeah, so your parents then must have had a big influence on you. I guess seeing your father as an entrepreneur must have given you, this is possible. You can actually do this. I've seen someone who this is a reality for, because most people, they're I can't be an entrepreneur. They don't exactly know what it is. And being an entrepreneur is actually not as flashy as many people think it is. It's just a lot of hard work and a lot of dreaming big and just executing. So was there any kind of mindset that seeing your dad work and helping out here and there with his work, did that give you any particular kind of mindset that you still use today and you find useful?
I think what's coming up is that fundamentally, you get out what you put in, almost full stop. And if you're willing to work hard, you can derive immense meaning and immense value. And I had a very beautiful life growing up, right? My brother and I didn't want for a whole lot, and so it was all of this is possible, right? So long as you're willing to just show up for yourself and show up for the people that you work with, right? And I think that's where you and I connect a lot, which is that deep work is fundamental to being human and deriving meaning, right? It's actually a very valuable and desirable part of the human experience. The fact that we're free enough to really dive deep into something and from nothing build just whatever it is that we want.
Yeah, one of the things that we've talked about in the past is, so you and I are both very spiritual, and you've been on every apotheosis retreat so far. I've been on 3 out of 4. But we also see the kind of spiritual value of work and being creative, whereas I sometimes speak to people and they have the most intense morning routines, they'll wake up, they'll drink the water with the warm water with the salt and the lemon, and then they'll do the half an hour of yoga, the cold shower, the meditation, the journaling, the gratitude. They'll do it all, and it's impressive. They got this 2.5 hour routine in the morning that they do with insane Jocko Willink level of discipline. And then it's they have this dream of starting a blog which never materializes, and it's well, what's going on? You clearly have this ability to do things that are somewhat uncomfortable, but you're putting off work over and over and over again. What do you think is going on there?
I think it's a fear of showing up, right? It's very easy to carve out a beautiful morning routine when it's all in your own control and you're the only one who ever sees it. But the moment I put a blog post up, that is open to the world for criticism. And that's very scary, right? It's not in your control. It sets you up for failure. And the other thing, this has been coming up a lot for me, particularly over the retreats, which is a lot of people fear their own success, right? And what I mean by this is, if you try something and you fail, your life doesn't actually change that much, right? Maybe you spent $40 on a domain name, right? All your friends are like, hey, you tried, whatever. But not a whole lot changes. But if you get quite successful, almost everything in your life changes. Your routine changes. Probably the people you hang out with change, right? The amount of responsibility and probably the people under you and the people that you're now responsible for change. And that's just such an overwhelming shift in identity that I think it scares a lot of people. Right, so there's certainly the fear of failure and criticism. That's always valuable and it's real. But I think a lot of people fear their own success a lot too, and so they self-sabotage by never really trying and never really starting.
On this point, so I've recently wrote a Stoicism article for as a kind of introductory material for the Stoic quest. And I included a point by Epictetus. It's from his handbook, and he had this amazing point that people complain about not having things for which they don't pay the price of admission. So it's it's equivalent to like looking into a party, complaining about how happy everyone is, and or kind of how much people are laughing compared to you, but you're not going to pay the $5 to get in. And this is true for everything. This is true for success in general. Like, we all say we want success, but we don't want to endure the anxiety or the fear or the difficult emotions that come up that is the price of admission for that. And that's kind of like the fear of success that you're talking about.
Yeah, that's an incredibly important point. This is what gives rise to the people like Gary Vee or Tom Bilyeu, right? Just this, you actually have to put in a considerable amount of effort. And to me, what that brought up is, I see this in myself, I see this in a lot of people, right? We grew up in like this handout culture, right? Everything is supposed to be given to me, right? I just by existing, I'm entitled to this stuff. Like, should I actually have to work for it? And I think it can be incredibly detrimental to people and to the culture overall, that there's just this underlying entitlement where, I don't actually have to work because I've never had to work for anything in my life, right? All my food is grown somewhere else and shipped to me. The electricity just turns on and I have no idea how it works, right? We have this idea of like a self-made man or self-made people, but really, like, that can't fundamentally be true, right? Thousands and thousands and thousands of people's effort goes into making your life happen. And the fact that we can't show up just a little bit for ourselves to push that all forward is saddening. Because you also, I think the really important point here is that you also derive immense meaning from your own work, from doing it yourself, right? It's cool to join a company and take them from 10,000 units to 100,000 units. That's awesome. But you will derive so much fulfillment from like creating one product and selling it to someone, or just making something yourself from scratch. It's so deeply, deeply fulfilling that it's a shame we don't give ourselves that opportunity.
On the topic of emotions, when people are practicing spirituality, maybe they're reading Eckhart Tolle, or have a really solid meditation practice, and they're in this nice flow state, this kind of chill, tranquil, nothing is too disturbing to them. And then the thought of doing the kind of work that you do and the kind of work that I do, of kind of, some of it's tedious, would you say? Some of it is stuff that you just needs to get done. You just kind of execute. You don't think, you just do it. A lot of it is very fulfilling and creative, but some of it is just executing. As Gary Vee, he has the analogy, the dirt and the clouds, like you need to be both. You need to get your elbows stuck in the mud and grind forward, and you also need to have your head in the clouds and dream big. How can people, or what is the value to people who are like, look, I'm not yeah, I don't have this blog that I've been dreaming about for a while, but I am kind of happy most of the time. And I know that if I do start a blog, I'm going to be dealing with rejection. Maybe someone's going to come along and criticize me. I have to learn all this stuff that's got nothing to do with being happy. I have to learn about SEO and WordPress. So do I really want to do that? What would you kind of say to them if they came to you with this kind of lack of certainty about the path forward?
I think the biggest thing that came up here is there's a huge difference between the comfortable good and the difficult great. And this is almost like the tragedy of our times, which is we have an entire almost world. We're moving in that direction that is easily afforded a comfortable life. Right? Like if someone is listening to this conversation right now, they have a comfortable life. Right? They have enough money that they can buy whatever device was needed to listen to this. They have some form of electricity to charge that device. And this keeps you, and this is such a testament to humanity, right? That we can maintain like a 7 out of 10 forever for so many people. That's truly incredible. But I think, and you see this in a lot of people, which is like, oh, I'm fine. Things are good, right? Things are never great. No one is ever like super stoked to talk to you. No one, there's like this dwindling of excitement, right? And it's because that comes from the difficult great, right? And you actually have to at times give up some of the comfortable good, right? Oh, I know what I'm doing in my job here. This is all relatively easy, right? You actually need to go into that space of, oh wow, I have no idea where I am or what the next steps are, but maybe I can learn it. And through that process of like learning and doing and executing, and then like that feedback loop, you get into this realm of, wow, this is great. Like I am on fire, I am learning, I am growing. But it takes the step away from, okay, I'm comfortable. Things are fine here. One other point, specifically to your point of like creating a blog or sharing your own story. It was actually something that you said to me a while back that really clicked, which is you as an individual may hold the key, and you do hold the key that will unlock someone else's life, right? Like there's so many self-help and personal development people that are like multi-millionaires and they have 5 homes. Like I don't want to call them out, but like even Tony Robbins is a great example, right? He's both extremely helpful, but like my life looks nothing like his, like in any way, right? But if like there are a few people, like particularly members of the HighExistence team, where it's like I see so much of myself in these people that their words hold a heavy weight to me. When they say something and give me a suggestion, I take it in very deeply, right? And my growth has been catalyzed through some of those conversations. And whoever is listening, right, you actually hold that power for someone. And sure, you may think to yourself, well, if I'm not going to hit 1 million people, I'm not going to do it. Or like Tim Ferriss has given everyone all of these suggestions before. Why does me saying it do any different? Well, it's exactly that. Someone might resonate with the way you word something, even if it's not as perfect. They might resonate more with your background story. And if you share something like, hey, here's 2 ways that I get out of a bad mood, right? And someone clicks deeply with that, you can quite literally save someone's life. But you never will do that if you don't say it and you just keep it all inside. So like, even no matter how small, adding your voice and your unique perspective to the conversation, to the world, the global conversation, is immensely, immensely valuable.
Yeah, so you just brought up Tony Robbins as an example of someone who's got this huge reach, right? Tony Robbins. And again, that brings up the point of the price of admission. Is Tony Robbins really successful because he's special, or was he willing to pay a price that I'm not willing to pay? And of course he is. I'm not willing to just start doing public talks every single day for hours on end to anyone who will listen, and film it and put it on YouTube and hone that craft and go on TV talk shows and try and heal people in minutes. He's paid the price of admission for his niche. And that's great, and that's not a price that I'm willing to pay. And just from knowing you, I don't think that you want to pay that price of admission either. There's other parties that you'd like to attend more. And it's so true what you say about you don't know the power that you have inside of you to save lives. Like, you don't have to be a lifeguard or a firefighter. Recently I wrote an article on, well, I didn't write the article recently, but a while back I wrote an article on anger. Seneca wrote a book on anger, and I broke down the book into kind of practical steps that people could read to help them get the better of their anger. And I published the article, and it had a few shares, but nothing too spectacular. And then I was ringing someone who was going to come on Apotheosis, the fourth Apotheosis, and he was like, look, I got out of the army and I stumbled on the Seneca post by you, and it really, really helped me with all of this anger that I had. And that post really helped me start meditating, because I messaged you on Facebook and I said, what can I do? And you told me to start meditating. I couldn't even remember the conversation, but he'd been meditating every day for a year. And that's the power you have just by putting your best self forward. And I recommend everyone gets a blog, because I started my blog Comfort Pit in 2015, and I didn't do it for money, and I've only written 25 articles for it. But without starting that small blog, that passion project, I would never have met anyone from the HighExistence team. None of this world would have been possible. So I just had the intention of starting a blog and just uploading some of my consciousness online, so other people could go hone in on it, resonate, and connect. And I think that unless you've got a really good reason not to do that, I would say, well, why not?
Yeah, and you touched on something really important, which is you have no idea what the future holds, right? So you could have just started a blog just for the sake of doing it, and that's all it could have ever been, right? But in the act of doing it, it's now rippled into what you are and what you're doing now, which is for all intents and purposes just beautiful and intensely valuable, right? But none of that was known at the time. Funny enough, the way I resonate most with that is with my story of coming into HighExistence, right? Like, all it ever started as was writing a few posts, and that was it, right? It was 6 months, but I was like, hey, Jordan, I love this. Can we keep doing stuff? Like, let me take over your social media, or let me help with that, right?
So this is Jordan Bates.
Jordan
you were
Bates.
messaging him?
Yeah, because he was my first point of contact for the writing role. And again, that's all I ever imagined that this was going to be, right? Just helping put out memes on Facebook, right? Like that was it. But through time and through that initial effort, it snowballed into the group of us now running these beautiful retreats, right? Which are one of, if not the most meaningful thing in my life right now, being a part of that. And there was nothing that indicated that would ever come to life, right? But it was those really small, trivial steps, like just scheduling posts on Facebook, that snowball into just these things that you can't even imagine.
When I first started with HighExistence, I remember Martijn telling me that I should listen to a podcast. It was a London Real podcast where Ryan Holiday was being interviewed, and there was a section on it on Ryan Holiday's apprenticeship with Robert Greene, because Ryan Holiday helped Robert Greene with some of his sort of research and writing flashcards for him and doing a lot of reading and summarizing. And Ryan Holiday's whole idea was to just give as much as you can possibly give and have faith that you'll get more back. And it requires a leap of faith, and that's why nobody does it. But I was like, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do that. And we've had many people come on HighExistence and be interns and write posts for us. And yet, Eric, you are the only one who's not only stuck around, but actually made yourself literally indispensable and a key figure on running what I believe are some of the most profound retreats on planet Earth. And I'm shocked to say that, but I mean, based on the feedback that we've been having, I think that's true. So what do you think separated you from like the average person who wanted to, like help out a little bit with HighExistence? Why do you think you stuck around and worked your way into someone who's indispensable?
Yeah, two things come up. The first is, and this requires, I guess, a level of humility, but one is just, you are not above anything, right? Like, this goes to the thing of just, this work requires a lot of small, somewhat silly tasks, like answering emails or fixing a misplaced shipment. Like, it was a big part of my process, right? I was coming from the startup world, like, and you want me to, like, submit new orders for people, right? And it was like, it was a big process. It was like, no, you're actually not above this. Like, just, you do what is necessary. You do what is necessary, and you do it as well as you can. And you should, like, people should get in that space just because that's like a mode of being you should inhabit. Like, if you are doing something, you do it as well as you can. Just kind of period. But my bigger and more real answer to that is that at the time, it was like my only option. And what I mean by this is, I there was overlap between my startup life and HighExistence, right? I would do startup during the day and I would do HighExistence in the evening. And there came a point in the startup world where I was sitting and I was thinking, I was like, the next 40 years of my life are going to be only minor variations of this. Like, I found myself in the space that I had gone to school for, like my whole life, right? I had like a manager role in a startup in the Bay Area, and it was just like, so everything I do now is going to be a variation of this. Maybe it'll be a different company, maybe I'll have a different job title, maybe it'll be a different product, but it's all flavors of the same thing, right? And that was important because I was also burnt out, somewhat unfulfilled. I felt like I was like destroying the planet with some of the products that I made, and that didn't sit very well. And so there was this big, like, meaning crisis that came up. I was like, oh my God, like, did I orient my entire life around the wrong thing? And so from that kind of chaotic space, and starting to ask the question again of like, what would I want to do every day that makes me feel good? Something like HighExistence bubbled up. And I had already read it for a long time. It added a lot of value to me, helped me answer a lot of these questions. So I was like, oh, I could do that for people, right? Help them address some of the more difficult questions in their life, right? And so then when that door actually opened up, right, when there was an opportunity to do some work, to become a team member, right, I didn't have any other doors open, which I think is the fundamental difference between maybe me and some of the other people who had given this a shot. They still had options. Maybe I'll work here, maybe I'll move to this country. For me, it was like, okay, I've already climbed one ladder and realized it was on the wrong wall, right? And so now it was like, oh my God, like I need to move in another direction. And so, when you have, or at least when you perceive that you have no other options, like, you will do what it takes to make it happen, right? Like, you will do anything. And again, the comfortable good and the difficult great. If you want to start something, like, make it have no other option, right? Build up some savings and start a company, and eventually it's going to run out, so you have to make it work. And that's not saying to be super foolish, but create an environment that pushes you and forces you in the direction that you want.
I love the this comfortable good and difficult great came up, and I wonder if it would be valuable for people to try out an experiment where they start dividing their options in real time into those two categories. Do you think that would be a good practice for people?
Oh, absolutely. And I think another good practice is to immerse yourself in some of those regularly. A really tangible example I can come up with is something like cold showers. Right? You've been experimenting with this recently. I've certainly done it, and it's one of those things. The warm hot shower is comfortable, but it's good. It actually it relaxes the body, right? It lowers your energy level a bit. But a cold shower, really difficult. It sucks while you're in it, and every day you do it, it pretty much sucks. It gets a little easier, but it's always really difficult. But there's a whole slew of benefits that come after it, right? Increased energy level, better immune system, right? So it's a brilliant example of the difficult great. Even something like meditation, right? A lot of people think, oh, you sit down and you do nothing, super easy. How am I going to get value from that? Well, do it. Sit for 20 minutes doing nothing. It's actually quite difficult, but again, the payoff and the long-term benefit is immense.
I don't think people realize a lot of people, when it comes to cold showers, might do a 30-day cold shower experiment. But you've got to think of that like if you did a 30-day weightlifting experiment. Like, you don't know the upper limits of transformation that can occur over time. So people give up generally way too soon. Like, they get some benefit, but they're like, oh, I'm not superhuman yet. It's like, of course you're not superhuman yet. Like, Wim Hof took about a decade to develop the method. Now he's refined it into like some system that you can use and get benefit from much quicker. But yeah, it's like weightlifting. 2 pound a month of muscle that you can gain as a natural weightlifter, especially as a beginner, even less as you get more advanced. And spirituality is no different. A month of meditating will have benefit, obviously, but I think the real difficult great is sticking with it for the long term. So what kind of things, and I'm going to get into myself as well in a minute, what kind of things in your life are the difficult great for you that you get stuck into regardless, because you know that the comfortable good is the other option?
Yeah, what a great question. There's almost like levels. There's like easily accessible, difficult ones. Things like lifting heavy weights, right? We have this epidemic of people who do 20-minute light walks around the block to lose weight, when really if you did like 45-second high intensity intervals, right, it's actually shorter, but because it's perceived to be way more difficult, no one does them. So yeah, a big one for me is actually like getting to the gym and lifting heavy shit. Cold showers is an immediately accessible one. But I think the real stuff is, if you think about your life for like 5 minutes and you're like, what am I avoiding? You'll probably have a list of a dozen things, right? And it's just continually building in myself the confidence to only attack those things, right? The things that you are resisting the most are probably exactly what you need to do, right? And I could name a bunch for people, right? That conversation that you haven't had with your parents or your girlfriend, you better go and have it, because that's probably the most important thing holding you back right now, right? Either asking your job for a raise or looking for something else, right? I almost guarantee you haven't done that, right? There's so many creating and sticking to a financial budget. Like, again, these things in reality take like 5 minutes to do, and people will quite literally delay doing them for their entire lives.
Yeah.
Because it's difficult, right? It's just this immediate hurdle. But if you can build this muscle through things like, quick ones like meditation or cold showers, you get better at it. And if you can just systematically wake up and do the hardest thing every day, your life will change dramatically in a month, 6 months, a year.
I read this book a while ago called Psychobabble, and it was the subtitle was something like Exploding the Myths of the Self-Help Generation. And the author raised a really good point, and he said in the book that, when we get into arguments or get insulted, the thing that does us the most damage are the kind of insults or slights that slip beneath the radar. So like if I'm gonna get really angry with you and I'm gonna rip your character to shreds right now, there's a part of you that gears up for that and puts on your defensive armor and you toughen up to the resistance. Kind of like if you were in a physical wrestling match with me now and you knew it, you would move differently and you would tense up differently and you'd have adrenaline. Versus a sucker punch from behind that might be not even that hard, but that catches you off guard. And the same as like you could be really having a really nice time with someone and they just slip a little slight in and it's like boom, goes straight into your soul. And I think like the way that the mind work is quite tricky, because you've mentioned lifting weights and cold showers, things that I love. I'm a big proponent of those things as being examples of the difficult great, and they are. But I also think that there's an element there where you're gearing yourself up for the hardship, where you're preparing for the fight, the challenge. And for some people, actually, the difficult great is the small things, the kind of menial things, the doing those 3 things every day that you write in your to-do list, tidying up your room, as Jordan Peterson says. Like in my own life, I'm for the last 6 months I've been going really deep into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and every time I go to the class and spar, I feel a little bit of fear, a little bit of resistance. I know that I'm going to get really hot and I'm going to get really tired and I'm going to have someone heavier kind of compressing into my ribs when I'm out of breath, and it's going to be unpleasant. It's going to be difficult. But when I'm in the middle of it, I just do it. The hard part is when I'm home and I know that the way I need to get better is to get down on the floor and do these boring solo drills for like 20 minutes. Just 20 minutes. That's all I've got to do just to practice certain movements. And I'll start doing it for a few minutes and I'm like, oh, was that a sound outside? I should go check what that sound is. And it's like I just do not want to sit down and do that kind of work, and that is the difficult great. So I just wanted to raise that point, that I think you are very good at doing the difficult great things, and often that can just be saying yes to things. That can just be like not leaving your desk until you've done that final task that you said you were going to do.
This is so important, and this almost loops back to the beginning of the conversation, which is the difficult thing for you is probably sticking with it, right? We live in this culture of immediate gratification versus like delaying for long term, and yeah, probably one of the things that you struggle with most is just sticking with something for longer than 30 days, right? Like there's this latent potential that everything has, right? Where you start and you'll see something, you get like the beginner gains, right? But often it's probably the compounding interest of 6 months of doing it daily that you really see everything. But because you're busy running around to the latest movie or going out drinking with your friends, right? You skip that day at the gym, or you skip meditation, right? And so actually discipline and just sticking with something longer than a few weeks is one of those difficult great things for people. There's this picture that floats around online that I absolutely love, and it's like for almost anything that you want to do in your life, finances, career, like whatever, the answer is just show up every day for 2 years. Like just great. Period. Like everyone is like, this is the quick fix culture, right? Like, hey, I have something that'll change your life overnight, or here's how to make $1 million in 2 weeks. And it's like, no, set up a very basic system that you can maintain and just don't question it. Do it every day for 6 months, for a year, for 2 years, and you will profoundly change your life.
Yeah, I think that's one of the issues that I also see when people get involved in kind of self-improvement, is this dabbling mindset, of like wanting to like try a bit of everything and not sticking with something too long, almost being averse to dogma. In 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson, he actually brings up a good point that dogma has benefits. When you just accept something unquestionably, you stick with it. If you're like, oh, there's flaws in every kind of practice, then you just do something for a month and then find the next thing, and then find the flaws in that, and then find the next thing, and you never go really deep into anything. And I wonder if you were to find a true meditation master, would they say practicing a different meditation every week for 5 years is preferable to going really deep into one single meditative practice for 5 years? I have an intuition that actually going deep into one practice might actually be, you might get benefits that far outweigh mixing it up a lot and always kind of starting again. Seneca, great quote, he said, "He is a fool who is always beginning to live." And there's a lot of that going on too, would you say? People like not sticking with stuff, just wanting to like, oh, I've just discovered the new way I should live. And it's like, again?
It's the person who each month is on a different diet. Right?
Yep.
Continually cycling through something, because again, it's almost like existential FOMO, right? Like, I got to try this, and then something new came up, so I've got to try this. We joke so much, and it comes up in common conversation of just like shallow people, right? Oh, they're not interesting to talk to. But like, really look at yourself. Like, how many things in your life do you go deep on? It's probably quite few. And it always comes back to this, which is like, the majority of the meaning and fulfillment of your life will be the things that you have mastered and gone incredibly deep on, right? You're never going to say like, oh yeah, I'm so stoked that I know 24 different kinds of meditation, right? It's, no, I embody meditation. It's part of my being, right? And that is what fulfills me. And that just comes up through immense repetition, right? The person who writes every day, who just sits in the chair and pumps out however many words want to come out, right? It's this, this is what we were speaking about earlier. There's like these stages. You start at knowing, you move into doing, and then through immense repetition, you eventually embody it, and it becomes part of your being. But so much of us, some of us never even get to knowing, right? This is ignorance is bliss, right? Where you just never even pay attention to it. But then the valley between knowing and doing is vast. How many things do you know you should do in your life that you don't, right? Eating, finances, like all this stuff, right? Working on a personal passion project. You should do all of this. You should stick to this stuff, but you never do it because it's hard. Setting up a habit and setting up a system is difficult. But because you never move into mastery or move into being, it never gets easier. So it's always difficult, and so you view everything in your life like it's super hard. But it's only because you're constantly starting again, right? You have to go back to like being a kindergartner like over and over again, when instead just sticking with it a little longer. And to your point about jiu-jitsu, drilling it. Like once you've gotten to the point where you can do it, you drill it so many times that it's reflexive. Right? It's not consciously thought of, it's just immediate. Like and once you get there, you come full circle to life is effortless again. I don't have to think about anything because it's a reflex. It's part of who I am. Right? Meditation is not difficult. It's just something I do. I am. Right? The same thing with writing or starting or growing an organization. It's like, this isn't difficult. This is just who I am.
So one of the reasons I love jiu-jitsu so much is because there's nothing I've ever encountered that teaches me more about the art of learning. And you mentioned Josh Whiteskin, who wrote the book, I think, The Art of Learning, who's a black belt in Brazilian jiu-jitsu. So there's a coach, well, I would say he's the best coach on the planet at the moment, John Danaher. He was interviewed by Joe Rogan, and it's interesting because he's got a master's in philosophy, which has greatly influenced his ability to teach jiu-jitsu. And he says there's a difference between knowledge and skill. The goal of there are many athletes that have a lot of skill, but they don't necessarily have knowledge. They can't really articulate what they know. They just spent hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours in the thick of it, and their body has just become wiser in the face of resistance from an opponent. Whereas he has knowledge. He's not an athlete. He has some skill, obviously, but his job is to impart that knowledge, and then an athlete can transmute that into skill. And I think that that's a really important distinction, because on the spiritual path or self-improvement path, a lot of us are getting caught up in the knowledge without cultivating it into a skill. It's like, I can tell you everything about meditation. That's great, but have you got the skill of mindfulness? Is it with you all the time throughout the day? Because reading 10 books on mindfulness without actually doing it will give you knowledge but no skill. Same as compassion. Reading a book on love and the value of compassion is great, but if you don't practice it, you don't have the skill. So then you just basically become a coach or a sophist, someone who is able to tell everyone else what they should do, but has nothing really to show for it. And again, this is a great quote by Epictetus, which I'll paraphrase. And someone asked him, what is the value of learning philosophy or stoicism? And he said, many people, he said he compared it to an athlete who has weights. If you go up to an athlete and say, show me what benefit you've derived, if he pointed at his weights, you think like, what the hell? He needs to point at his fitness. And many of us are pointing at like, oh, we've been on 10 retreats. Oh, we've read this book and this book and this book. Oh, we've clocked this many minutes of meditation. That's cool. That's a nice accomplishment. But how do you live? What is the quality of your mind like? What skills do you have that you apply every day? And I think that with jiu-jitsu, I could watch a video learning a technique and learn a technique through the video, but that's as good as pointless in terms of developing skill. The way you actually learn the skill is you watch the video, you visualize doing it, then you get a partner, you do it a few times with your partner, then you ask your partner to add a little bit of resistance, then you go into a real situation where the person is trying everything to thwart your efforts to beat him or her. Then you do the move and it's likely that it won't work at all. Then you go back to the video and then you drill it more and more and more, maybe 100 times, and then eventually you might be okay at it. And then in 5 years you might actually be excellent at it, and then in 10 years you'll be a master of it. And that's learning. And that's not how people learn in the self-improvement world at all.
No, and what you're touching on here is it's a byproduct of a culture where people can get by only being seen as something.
Yeah.
Right? When everything is just an image that I can convey to you, I don't actually have to be able to do anything. Right? This is the rise of influencer culture. What does an influencer do other than be seen to do things? Right? They don't actually do anything. And so, you have to cut people some slack in some sense, right? If it doesn't actually matter how much you can do, no one is going to do it, because to your point, it's hard work, right? But we're not talking about how you want to be seen, right? This is when you look in the mirror and you look at yourself and you say like, who am I and what can I do, right? It's not what can I tell people, right? You want to be able to look at yourself and know what you have done. There are a few lines that came up for me that have been just extremely important recently on this note. One is, knowledge is only a rumor until it lives in the muscle, right? And that's just beautiful, right? You can act like you know all you want, but until that challenge comes up and you actually have to do the thing, right, you don't know anything, right? Sam Harris has this other beautiful line, which is just, wisdom is the ability to take your own advice. Because again, I can tell you what to do all day, right? All day. But until I do it myself, right? It's the paradox of like, the trainer who is incredibly scrawny and weak, and because of that you have like immediate distrust, right? You're like, how are you going to tell me how to build strength when you have not been able to do it yourself, right? There's just this disconnect there. A really nice example I heard the other day was if someone asked you who has better knowledge of a chair, who would you say? The person who can describe it very beautifully, or the person who can build you one? Right? I think we intuitively feel like the person who can construct a chair out of nothing has a deeper understanding of it, right?
Yeah.
Because they can go from nothing to doing whatever it is that elicits that result, right? And so, you can be in these different stages in all different parts of your life. Maybe you embody really good financial sense, right? But you're small and skinny and haven't quite gotten past knowing there, right? You can be in different spots, but I think we should always come back to asking ourselves, like, what can I do now to actually move forward in this and to deepen my practice, right? Even that, the way that is said says something, right? To deepen your practice, right? Whether that's meditation or jiu-jitsu, right? You deepen it. You go further into it. You don't jump around on the top. You go immensely low and deep into it.
So I want to run, because we've talked a lot about the value of committing to things and sticking with things. And a point I wanted to bring up earlier is that it almost doesn't matter what the thing is that we stick to. Like if I do morning pages and just write for 15 minutes anything that comes to my mind, or I just journal in the evening, or I do this meditation or that meditation, this exercise, that martial art, I don't think the content is that important. I just think sticking with something that challenges you and is difficult, past that point where when you start to become bored and you keep going anyway, that's really good. That's actually a sign of deep growth and maturity, actually, because otherwise you're kind of a child. It's like, oh, I'm bored for a few minutes, I'm gonna quit this now. It's like, no, you're bored, that's another feeling in consciousness. Logically, rationally, does this still benefit you? Yes, keep going then. So I would like to encourage our listeners to commit to 3 things for the next 12 months right now. And I think you and I should also do this as well, like to kind of show how you can do this. For me, at the moment, I'm practicing the Wim Hof method, getting a lot of benefit from his breathing technique in the space of 4 weeks. And when I first started, my average retention rate was like a minute and a half. Recently, I've been hitting like 3 minutes and 20 seconds for breath holding in just 4 weeks. I started off, I could do 22 push-ups. 4 weeks later, I can do 35. My ability to handle the cold, and this is just 4 weeks. So, is this helping me? I think so. It's doing something. So I'm going to stick with this for the next 12 months. Breathing and cold exposure. I'm going to stick with my jiu-jitsu for the next 12 months. And for the third component, what else could I do that can give me a lot of value? I'm going to keep reading books on Jordan Peterson's recommended book list, because all of the books that I've read on there have really made me think differently about life. So for the next 12 months, I commit to those things. And we can definitely do a follow-up as well in a couple of months and see how we get along with those. How about you?
Oh, this is such a good idea. This is actually quite wise, because even for everyone listening, right, a public commitment that lives outside of yourself is incredibly important, because now you have the added like social pressure. People know. Yeah. Oh, this is good. So the one that came up immediately for me was, I want to continue my tea practice. We spoke a little bit about this, but this has become really central to me. This practice of like tea as meditation and just a training presence and full attention.
So how does that work?
It can be as simple as just being fully present through the process of making tea and consuming it. Right.
So I'm trying to picture that, because I'm not really a big tea person. I drink quite a lot of coffee. So you get a mug that you like. You add tea, like a tea bag or some sort of tea strainer, or
it really depends what's available to you. Again, this is one of those things you can go as deep or as shallow. I'll use a really basic example of like a cup, a tea bag, and a kettle. It's actually it's more just being present with it, right? Mm-hmm. So get your water, boil it. Don't do anything. Sit and meditate. See if you can intuit when it's hot enough, instead of just waiting for the thing to click off, right? And then you're there, you're present, you pour, You watch it fill, you sit with it while it steeps for a bit, take it out, and then you just enjoy, right? And you be fully present for the process of your cup, right? And it's for me, it's been like an augment to meditation, because it's easy. It's not easy to pay attention when you're sitting doing nothing, but it's another when you have things moving around and you're flowing a little more. There's also just a kind of beautiful aspect of tea, right? It's quite literally plant medicine, right? Like it heals the body. It's a beautiful, simple communion with nature, right? It's nourishing you. There's a whole slew of just nice things that come with that, but it's mostly, particularly in the morning, it's the pace that I want to start my day with, slow, intentional, measured, right? So it's been quite valuable, and so that's definitely a big one. Doing a page of open journaling, right? And often these two things can go hand in hand. I think we underestimate the power of getting things out of your head, right? Whether that's speaking them verbally to someone else or just writing them down. Like you can quite literally feel like mental fog clearing out, right? So that's been beautiful. And actually one that I've always struggled with is I need to eat more. I need to take in more nutrition. I've always been, a small guy, and if I'm being honest, that's mostly from my own doing, right? I often don't eat as much, don't work out as much as I could, and so I think it starts there. So those are the big three.
So on the point of eating more, is it like, do you just find that you get quite full easily, or like what's going on there that's stopping you? Because I'd love that problem, but I don't have that. So what's it like to be you in that area?
Man, it's a combination of a lot, right? And I almost haven't picked it through fully. There's one part that's just like I don't really want to spend all my time preparing food, but like I also don't want to go out and be buying like quick processed food a lot. And so, I often end up having like one monster meal at the end of the day. You could call it intermittent fasting, but it's almost just kind of being lazy and not wanting to make breakfast or lunch, right? Even something like getting full quickly, that can be trained, right? If you just slowly intake more food, right, you expand and your body gets used to that as well. I think it was just for a long time, and why the habit got so deeply ingrained, it was living too much up in my head, right? It was, I as me exist up in here, and I have some, kind of lame vehicle that I drive around in, right? But the mind-body interplay is way more powerful than we give it credit for, right? And so even if you consider yourself this thing up in your head, right, the more you can fuel the vehicle, the better the thing up in your head gets. And so just even having that practical understanding of like all of what I consider myself gets better by fueling myself effectively. Yeah.
So something as well to consider, a lot of people in the spiritual space don't have a very, some obviously do, but some of the people that I've spoken to, they don't have a very scientific understanding of nutrition. And the reason why is because almost every book written on nutrition is bad. It's not very good, because the author has a particular kind of agenda or a money-making interest, and they want to cherry-pick studies. I interviewed Eric Helms on the podcast. I'd really recommend listening to that if you're interested in nutrition. The idea is there's no one diet that is necessarily better. All diets contain some sort of gimmick. So if you think of the low-carb diet, does the low-carb diet or the no-carb diet work for reducing body weight? It does. Why? Is it because carbs are the devil and dangerous and make you gain weight? No. It's because you remove an entire food source from your diet, so then it just becomes a bit harder to eat as much and you lose weight. It's psychological. And in the end, calories are very important. And to your point, on you is that everyone has a different basal metabolic rate. Everyone burns different amounts of calories throughout the day. Some people, they just fidget more. You can burn hundreds of calories through fidgeting. Some people, they don't sit down. They always want to stand up, and they just always want to be moving. And if, Eric, you have a basal metabolic rate of like 5,000 calories per day, and I have a basal metabolic rate of like 2,000 calories per day, good luck to you in gaining weight and eating clean. It's just going to be too difficult. Like, the amount of chicken breast and broccoli that you'd need to consume is going to be like off the chart. So for certain goals, I think it's actually wise to look at what kind of sacrifices you want to make. Like, you might not want to eat ice cream or burgers, which is fine, but then you have to go, well, what's more important? Do you want to gain more weight, or do you want to avoid ice cream and burgers? Which one is more important? And there's a quote by Alain de Botton which I love. He says in his TED talk, if you want to be successful, you need to realize that you're going to be unsuccessful at things. You're not going to be able to do it all. You're not going to be able to balance work and life perfectly. So accepting straight away, like, I'm going to be bad at this. I'm going to be bad at clean eating in order to gain more weight, or I'm going to be bad at gaining weight in order to be good at clean eating. Sacrifices need to be made at every kind of critical point in growth, I think.
That's a really important point. What came up as you said that is just, you can sit and accept that fully, but for me it just comes down to, am I giving my conscious full effort into whatever that decision is, right? And to me the answer has probably been no at times, right? It's like, actually I do agree, I often tilted more to the what I perceived as healthy food. I've actually been, again, vegetarian for 10 years now, right? And again, that cuts out a lot of nutrient dense foods, which can help with that, but that was a conscious decision, right? But even as I say, I sit here and I know intuitively of many nutrient dense foods that I can still eat. Have I done my best at actually doing and going out and buying them regularly? Probably not, right? And so you can accept whatever challenge or sacrifice you need to make, but just, again, to what I said earlier, just do your actual best when you go and act on that. And I think that's where my intention is coming from, right? Just when I make these choices, make them as well as I can.
So I want to change gears for a minute. We've talked about a lot of interesting sort of tips for people in bridging the gap between spirituality and deep work. We've heard a little bit about your background in startups and with business. Let's go back to how you first became interested in spirituality. How did that come about, and how has your spiritual path developed since?
That's a great question. My family was never overly religious growing up. Like, I think the most religious we ever got was doing Easter egg hunts on Easter and presents on Christmas, right? I never went to church service or any of that. Both of my grandparents would force us to say grace during dinner, but that was really all it ever was. And what really, and you'll see this is a common kind of theme in my life, which is, as far as climbing the Western ladder goes, like, my family has done very well, both my grandparents and my parents, right? My whole view into the world growing up, right? They were ostensibly successful, right? Nuclear family. Like, I had a very almost cartoon, like, cliche life, like the dog, the suburb house, all of that stuff. I noticed at times, though, like, despite having what I viewed as everything, I found that my family was still easily angered. We couldn't talk about very deep emotion And my grandparents' health wasn't great. Despite being retired and having the financial means to do whatever it is they wanted, they couldn't physically do a lot of the things that they wanted, like go golfing or skiing or whatever that was, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, over time that started poking holes in my worldview, right? It was like, if I fast forward my own life and I do all of these things, am I still going to be upset and grumpy and out of health and not able to do the things I want? And when you get, that just snowballs into, okay, so is that the right way to live? And then you get into your teenage years and you start just being grumpy and angry and hormonal about everything, and it was like, okay, that's probably not the right way to live, right? Because a lot of the things that they want, like deep connection and fulfillment, they don't seem to have, or have as much of as I would want when I'm that old. And so then the question opens up, which is, okay, so what would do that for me, right? Like how do you cultivate fulfillment in your life? How do you define success outside of the signals, right? Like vehicles and cottages and all of this stuff, right? What does true success look like? And when you start asking that, it just takes you a whole bunch of places, right? Like, okay, if I can't sit by myself, and if I can't look in the mirror and actually smile at who I see, that's not successful, right? And so this just launched this exploration of, okay, so what things can I do that would move me in that direction, right? And then you get into things like meditation or spirituality at large, right? Because, okay, this is a source of great meaning for people, right? And sure, maybe I don't have to believe that in the traditional like Christian value of God, but the fulfilling aspects of spirituality are immense, and they've stood the test of time, and they're important for humans, right? So much of being a human is living in story and living in metaphor, right? It's not so much the physical stuff, it's are you living a good life? How you define it. Are you moving towards what is successful for you? Are you contributing beyond yourself? And that was a big one, right? That came up in my startup theme, which was, I feel like I'm only serving myself and damaging the world, and I want to do the opposite. I would actually willingly sacrifice myself in the service of others. And so it just started, this fundamental like orientation in me started to switch to, instead of chasing quote unquote success, can I chase meaning, right? And what would my life look like if I was chasing meaning, right? And that quite frankly led me to a few of my own personal practices, and it actually also led me to HighExistence, right? I started reading, right? Because I was looking quite desperately for a place or people who were discussing this, because it wasn't in my immediate life, right? I was already in business programs. My family, this fell short at times for my family, having discussions like this, and so I just needed an outlet, right? And part of that was my own practice, and part of that was finding where in the world I can get all of this. And then, once you go from knowing to doing, once I started putting it in place and actually doing this in my life, you can feel it, right? You can feel that fire deep inside start burning brighter again. You're like, wow, okay, this feels nice. I feel seen and I feel loved and I love myself, right? That was something I struggled with for a damn long time, right? Just actually being proud of myself. It was always like, I haven't accomplished this, so I can't be happy, and I don't have this yet, so I'm not worthy. And it's like, no, you need none of that to be at peace within yourself. And it's quite addictive, right? You get a little taste of that and you say, wow, this feels so right, I want more. And so you just continue walking the path.
And what do you think was unique about your take on spirituality compared to how other people approach spirituality? Because speaking personally, I think that the HighExistence team, we have this kind of realistic, down-to-earth, Alan Watts called it no-fuss approach to spirituality, where if you came and met us in a bar, we're just like super chill, super cool guys you could just talk about anything in the world to. And then on the side, we all have really deep spiritual practices. We do a lot of work with plant medicine, We're constantly reading and educating ourselves, but it's never coming across as like this arrogant, we are better than other people type of spirituality, which is so prevalent now.
Yeah, I haven't spoken about this as much with almost anyone on the team, but almost all of my practice was born out of deep necessity. I've given a foray into my work life and my personal life growing up, but really the undertone of that was deep self-inflicted suffering, right? It wasn't that I was just questioning this stuff, it was that I was completely disoriented. I was confused, I was immensely anxious, I was extremely depressed and extremely upset with the world, right? I was quite living probably like the 0.5% life, like one of the best lives in all of human existence to date, and I was extremely unfulfilled. And that poured onto itself, right? Because it was like, how can I be so ungrateful? How can I, oh my God. And so it was all born from very deep suffering, right? And I went through the whole phase. Like I did classic therapy. I was on medication for some time, which was immensely numbing, and I hated that. So I knew I needed to heal from that too. I needed to heal the sadness and the medication. And so, right, that drew me. It was just this searching for anything I could grasp onto that would help me through this process. What also factored into this is, I did the whole like militant atheist thing, like, you're an idiot for believing in God. How could you be so stupid? There is only science. Science is the one true lens to view the world at, right? And so I was also extremely averse to anything I viewed as woo or spirituality. I hated the word spirituality, period, right? Because it comes with the hippie movement baggage. It comes with all this love and light, bro. Like, just be free. And I was extremely resistant to that. So my entrance into this world was, quite frankly, science-based. It was like, oh, okay, so meditation fundamentally changes the structure of your brain and can make you less anxious, right? It was that foot in the door that, it was science-based. And then it was like, then it extrapolates out a little bit, because then you get into things like, oh, humans actually need a meaning structure, right? A way of orienting themselves in the world to live a good life, right? And, that is a little difficult because it's not very tangible, right? It's highly metaphorical. This is a lot of the undertone of Jordan Peterson's stuff, right? Like, there is more that is real than what you can touch, right? Like, when you touch money, you're touching like cotton or paper, right? Money is an idea. A country is an idea. Government is an idea. So there are things that we consider real that we can't touch. And once I accepted that was a big catalyst, right? Because then you get into exploring emotion, exploring subtle energy in the body, and then of course I think for many of us there's also this tangible path of like, okay, so I went from pharmaceutical medication to self-medicating with cannabis because I couldn't do that, so I transitioned off of medication. And then once you open that door of like, oh, I actually enjoy this experience. I'm having interesting conversations with people. I'm more connected to my body and not as up in my head, which is a big problem with people who are anxious or depressed, right? You're in endless thought loops. So as I can come back into my body. And then you go down that road a bit, and I quite frankly I'd be lying if I said that like plant medicine hasn't played a very prominent part in my just spiritual path and spiritual exploration overall, because it opened me up to so much archetypes and depth psychology, subtle energy, the value of like Zen and meditation. Like, all of this stuff really stemmed from, holy moly, there are multiple lenses I can view reality through. And then again, if you find the things that fit with you and make you feel good, right, you're more inclined to just keep walking the path. And so now where I am now is just a student walking the path. I want to take a second quickly to switch it around and ask you a question, because I know there's something that in this day and age may not be too obvious, but I know that we both share in common, which is one of the tools that we both use in our arsenal is the productivity planner from Intelligent Change. And, it seems like everything is being ported digitally now. Everyone's trying to figure out these complex systems and structures to, for work, for their own life. Was there something that drew you back into the analog world?
That's a really good question. So I want to start answering that by asking, what is technology? I think that there's this bias, this assumption by modern people that it's digital, it's computer, like it's kind of high tech is technology. But actually, a paintbrush is tech. And one of the best pieces of tech ever devised on this planet is paper. Right? I mean, how good is
absolutely.
paper? You can write something on it, and then it stores for so many years. And you can just glance at it really quickly. You don't need to scroll through thousands of different kind of obscure files on your computer or your hard drive. It's just there, and it's personal. And what got me interested in this kind of like old tech way of doing things was I read Leonardo da Vinci by Walter Isaacson, the biography. And Walter Isaacson made that point that paper is such an amazing technology, and we don't see it like that. And in his research on Leonardo, he started keeping a notebook, and he made sure that it wasn't digital, it was an actual notebook. I've always used apps, and I still use apps. I love apps. I'm totally an app guy, and I want to pick your brain on what apps you use in a moment. But I'm also someone who has always kept a little space in my life for notebooks. I've just got notebooks. I've always kept notebooks. I've always drawn, and I was always searching for the new app, the new productivity app, and I saw Sol Orwell, who's the one of the founders of Examine.com, a really good unbiased source for nutrition and supplement information, who also lives, I think, in Toronto or near Toronto, where you live. And he mentioned that he used the productivity planner. So I was like, okay, I'm going to check this out. And the first thing that happened was I ordered the productivity planner, and it just felt special. Just having this thing that I could own, that I could take with me, that I could lay out before work, get a pen. It's like that ritual of doing it. With a to-do list, it's like type in your tasks, then click a button, and the check mark is ticked and it's done. There's much more of like kind of a deep ritual involved with the productivity planner. So you open the productivity planner, you write down the date. Like, what's the point in writing down the date? It doesn't do anything, but you write down the date anyway. And then you write down your task of most importance. You look at your top 15 tasks for the week, and you time yourself with the Pomodoro technique, and it's much more of a ritual element to it. And I do believe that anything can be powerful if you bring the right intention to it. Like, I can give you the most terribly recorded meditation ever, but if you bring a certain quality of mind to it, you're going to get a lot out of that meditation. And if I give you the most perfect recorded meditation by the most enlightened individual of all time, and you bring a very poor quality of mind to that meditation, it's not going to work for you. And I think the productivity planner helps me bring a good intention to my work day. Before I do any work, I've already gone through a certain kind of ritual, and I can see at a glance off my computer what I'm working on. I want to flip it back to you, because you were using the productivity planner before I used it. So what brought you to it, and how has that helped you, and how does it compare to digital apps that you use?
What solidified the productivity planner for me was actually getting started with the other product that Intelligent Change sells, which is the 5-minute journal. And I first found out about that from a Tim Ferriss podcast. He started referring that quite a lot. And there was a similar undertone in your answer where when you open your phone, right, and you're looking at the screen, everything is essentially of equal importance, right? Maybe there's an app icon that draws your eye faster, but the only separation you have is basically what page of your screen you put it on and if it's in the dock or not, right? When you have, and we can speak about this a bit later as well, like I don't own very much, period. So when I have an entire physical object dedicated to the practice of gratitude, right, it imbues it with this like importance and power that was what I wanted and needed at the time, right? It was like, okay, I find myself quite jaded, quite unimpressed. Although I know I shouldn't be, I still feel that day to day. And so having this object that continually emphasized that was really important. And then, having that precedent already be set, and then realizing that, there was one, they have something else all about just output and getting and moving your life forward, whether that's work or personal. It just fit so nicely. And so I got started with that, and what's really nice is that they combine so many really clever like productivity tools in it. You mentioned the Pomodoro technique, which in itself is fantastic. They pair that with like, you could essentially call it the eat the frog technique, right? Where you do the biggest, most important thing first and you really focus on nothing else. That was hugely important. What I think a lot of people don't realize is that like, if you did the single truly most important thing of your day every day, you would be eons ahead of other people, because many of us can go a full week without ever doing like the two most important things, right? We just answer emails and then flip back to Facebook and then flip back and someone's already replied to our email because they're doing the same thing, right? And immediately, right, the one presentation or report or blog post you had to do sits on the back burner again. And so they just combined a lot that was really nice. And it comes back to the things I want to create and do in the world are important to me, or at least I say they are. So to have this physical like totem, this sacred object oriented all around that, gives me a lot of value. The second half of that was how it relates digitally. To be fair, like we run our entire organization digitally, right? Mm-hmm. None of us live in the same country, right? We're all in different time zones, and if it wasn't for digital tools, we'd probably be lost, or we wouldn't have met in the first place, mm-hmm. right? So you can't underscore that. But I think it almost doesn't matter what the specific tool is, right? To your point, it's how you actually show up and use it. And I think it just comes down to actually experiment with these things, right? Digital, analog, different software do the same thing, and find something that clicks. Because if you, again, we spoke about this earlier in the conversation of hopping around these different tools all the time, right? If you're still doing that with like productivity systems, you're only going to get so far. Honestly, just pick something that works well enough and lock it in for like 6 months or a year, and just make it a habit, make it a ritual, and it will take you so far.
So I know that I've been in this phase, as I'm sure you have, of always searching for other people's productivity systems to as a kind of hope that it will suddenly make us high in conscientiousness and make us never procrastinate again. But that's just not how it works. And I know there's a trap in always looking for the new shiny productivity app or method. At the same time, I have actually learned a lot from other people's productivity systems. So I wouldn't discourage it completely. I would just have it like with the addendum that, no productivity strategy is going to help you if you don't show up and do the work. That's primary. So with that said, what is your general productivity system right now? Like, how do you collect tasks, organize tasks, execute tasks, reward yourself when they're done? What kind of mindsets do you have? Do you have any kind of like quick tricks? Anything you can share that our listeners could incorporate into the way that they execute on tasks.
Yeah, this is huge. So I can speak to whatever comes up. Again, I would actually just start by underscoring the idea that whatever it is you can find that you will actually continue day in and day out, like just focus on that. That is like 95% of the battle, because we all sign up for this app, 3 weeks later we're not using it, and then we're back in the chaos of not having a system at all. Period.
So you have to use something that you enjoy using and you can see yourself using long term.
It has to be sustainable.
Okay.
It has to have, right, like, you could have technically a productivity system of, I'm going to work 72 hours straight at the beginning of the week and get everything done. Cool, you can do that, but you're probably going to last 2 weeks tops, right? And this is a long marathon. I think the best way to think of it is it's a marathon of sprints, right? So you sprint, you work really hard on something, you stop, you rest, you reassess, you analyze, you improve, and then you sprint again, right? And so fundamentally, if that whole arc isn't sustainable in the long run, you're just going to crash and burn. And again, not the point. You're not going to have a good time, right? If all of this is done for like a personal project, you're going to end up resenting it, right? Because it's draining you. And again, not super ideal. So like long-term sustainability is important. Again, I think the second most important thing I would emphasize is if you can do the single most important thing each day, like, again, you're ahead of almost everybody, right? And so, that can take a number of shapes, right? The productivity planner makes you write it down in its own section. You could quite literally, I've seen many people do this quite successfully. You take a sticky note, you write that one thing on it, you slap it onto your laptop, and you do nothing else until that thing is done.
So you work then with the kind of like a priority list in mind. So how do you determine what the most important task is of the day?
I think the easiest framework that exists right now is the Pareto principle, right? The 80-20. Is there one thing I can do that if I actually did it, I wouldn't even have to do 6 of these other things? Or it's such high leverage that it moves everything behind it forward, right? It pushes everything. And some of that's almost like a learned skill, right? Because you may think like, oh, I need to respond to this email. It's actually like high importance. They need to lock in a date or something, right? But if it's that in opposition of like finalizing some new revenue generating product, right? Like eventually you just get really good at discerning what that is. But to our point, you often will feel the most resistance to doing that. And even that is the answer to how you figure it out. What are you resisting doing the most because you know it's so important? And if you can train yourself to just systematically do that, oh my God. Again, and you can sustain it over time, like your output just quadruples. It's really incredible.
Another way to think about that, might be something like, you mentioned earlier on Sam Harris's quote, wisdom is being able to follow your own advice, something like that, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of like, what advice would you give yourself for what task you should be executing on right now? If you were your own best friend.
That's a beautiful point. And really what that sparked in me is plan, right? Just plan. Sit down on a Sunday evening and be like, these are the most important things I need to get done. I also have to make space for these smaller things because they just need to happen, but they're not as important, right? And, I could just list off concepts that really help with this, right? Like the Eisenhower matrix, right? You actually figure out what you should do now, what you should delegate to other people, what you should just not do entirely, right? That's a really helpful framework. I think a nice way this is also said, this came from Mark Twain, right? To eat the frog. That's the name for the concept. If you have to eat a frog today, do it first thing in the morning. And if you have to eat 2 of them, eat the biggest one first. Again, so if you block out a chunk, this is also the maker-manager schedule, right? If you have to make something, block out time for deep work early on in your day, like when you're highest energy. So like 10 to 12 a.m., nothing. No meetings, no notifications, no nothing. You take your most important thing and you just do it. You systematically do it. And if you can repeat that every single day, Because what we think of is, oh, well, I won't have time to do all these slightly more urgent things, even though they're smaller, right? So you just fill your whole day with them, and they keep popping up, right? They never end. But you can also sit like peacefully and confidently knowing like I'm only taking 2 hours to do this thing. I'll still have like 5, 6, 7 hours at the end of the day that I can get to all the other things. They have their space, but if you don't make the space for the big thing early on, you'll never get to it later on in the day when you're low energy and people are calling you and just all of it comes up. And so carving out that space is super important.
So these concepts for some people will be great. They'll just be able to hear them and start practicing them. But other people, and I'm thinking myself, I like to learn concepts through the details, you know. So what is your specific kind of like productivity system right now? Like, so how do you, when you start the week, how do you collect ideas, tasks, do you use a calendar? Like, can you run us through exactly what you're doing right now?
Yeah, of course. So I think it starts, I have like a dumping zone, like basically just a note where if anything comes up that needs to get done, it goes in there.
What app is that?
Right now it's literally just notes, like the notes app on Mac, and it's just really simple, like little, just an endless list, right? And then at the end of the day, I'll go through and I'll sort out. So either it gets prioritized, it gets added to a day. Right now it depending on if it's personal stuff or if it's work, it lives somewhere else. I've started using Evernote a lot, right, for personal stuff.
So when you say at the end of the day, do you mean the end of the workday or the end of the day before you go to bed?
Normally when I'm about to stop working.
So that you've built that into your work day, like at the end of your work day, you kind of like have a review period.
Yeah.
Right. So that's just become this ingrained habit that you have.
Yeah, it's important, right? You plan at the beginning and you assess at the end. And then it becomes this feedback loop of how did I do, what did I miss, what comes up that's important, and then you project that down the rest of the week.
Okay, that alone is so huge to kind of like make it part of your work to categorize all the ideas that come up throughout the day. Is this actually something that I want to keep hold of? Should I store this for the future? Is it something I can do tomorrow? Should I email someone about this? At the end of every day, you spend some time sorting out the dumping ground. Okay.
Really, the important thing there is getting it out of your head, right? If you have 10,000 things swirling around in your head, you're done, right? You're anxious. You're guaranteed you're going to forget 40% of them anyways. So just do yourself a favor and just have a place where you just unleash all of them. And half the time I'll comb back through that and just erase like a good chunk. Right, it just became irrelevant. I did something else that accomplished the same thing. Someone else grabbed the task from me, but at least it's not swirling around, taking up bandwidth for me. Probably the most fundamental thing that I do to get through work is a combination of two things. Right, we touched on the Pomodoro technique, right, and for I guess to give a really simple overview of that, it's like you work in 25 or 50 minute bursts with a 5 or 10 minute break afterwards, right? Nothing else happens in that work session, no notifications, no distraction, you just work straight at it. And you'll be amazed what you can do in half an hour of truly deep work. Like it's amazing. But so I take that framework and I map it over to something called 135, which is the one most important thing you have, right? The single most important thing. 3 like high leverage moves, like 3 important tasks, and then 5 just stuff you need to do, right? Buy groceries, call mom, like whatever it is that you have to do, but it's just not high priority, right?
And is this all work stuff, or do you mix in the personal stuff with it too?
It's a mix of both.
Okay.
Because my day is just a mix of both. right? Like I only have a certain amount of hours to just do stuff. I'm normally not doing anything in the evening, right? So it all comes up there. But what I really like about this system is that the most important things also get mapped to the most amount of time, right? So the one single most important thing gets 4 Pomodoros, which works out to 2 straight hours of like deep work, right? And that's incredible. And again, if you start at 10 a.m., you're done by lunch. And just that by itself, most important thing, 2 hours a day, will catapult you. Then the 3 like important priorities, they get 2, right? So they all get an hour of work. And so that's another.
They all get an hour. So all 3 you work on for 1 hour.
Each separate thing gets 1 hour. Yeah, so that's 3 hours.
So 3 hours in total for the 3 things.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So 2 hours of deep work on the one thing, 3 hours on the 3 things. Okay.
And then the 5 small things just get 1 Pomodoro each, and often they can just be grouped up, right? You make a call that lasts 10 minutes, you buy groceries online, it takes 15 minutes, right? It's 1. And what's actually amazing about this is if you did that every day, that amount of work, it's probably more than you'll get done in a regular week, right? Like it's seriously that powerful. But if you add up the time, it still is literally only 7.5 hours. So it's like a week's worth of work in one day. And if you can make that your life every day, because again, the Pomodoro technique is nice because it gives you breaks built in, right? It gives you rest periods. So it is actually sustainable over time, right? And that whole concept, right? Imagine if you did 5 weeks worth of work in a week.
So this is interesting. So how do you, I want to get into the nuts and bolts of this because it sounds like a great idea. So do you actually do this every day? So you spend 7.5 hours every day being productive in this way?
No human is perfect, and I am most certainly not perfect. But what this continually gears me back to is this the most important thing? And again, I've emphasized this like 2 or 3 times now. If you can get that one thing done each day, it will still move you in a very significant direction very quickly.
So so this is about your intention. You're aiming at, you're using this as kind of like a path.
Yeah, and like everything gets listed out. So I have this dream list of like if I kick ass today, this is everything that's going to get done. And then you don't have to beat yourself up, right? Anything that doesn't get done gets reassessed and shifted to the next day.
So how do you keep this list? How do you kind of like, what is the list kept on? How do you see it?
Right now I've been playing with Todoist again. I like that because everything gets a color category based on what kind of work it actually is, whether it's for HighExistence or the retreat or just my own life. And then it's a really simple way. You also get to set priority levels, right? So the one most important thing gets the big red P1 priority. The smaller things get theirs. And then it's just, right, you have your today view. It has 8 things on it. And all I'm trying to do is finish that list. There's no great thought that goes into it. It's just super simple. And the great thing about Todoist, right, is you now have this backlog, right? You have your backlog of tasks that you can put in, and you can schedule them on certain days. So if I have a really perfect week, I can go in on like Sunday evening, schedule out my whole week, right? And then just wake up and run the system, right? I wake up, I go to the today view, it's got 8 things. My only job today is to kick ass and finish those 8 things, knowing the whole while that they are actually like high leverage, really important moves. Okay,
so someone like me now might take on this system and be like, this is it, this system sounds great, and it actually does sound great. I love this. The 1 big thing, the 3 kind of medium-sized things, and the 5 just like smaller things. They try using Todoist. They use the Notes app, pen and paper, but they find themselves day 3 of the week. They show up to work. They start working on that one thing. 20 minutes in, it's going good, and then they feel like it would be nice to go out for a walk and get a cup of coffee and listen to that new podcast that just come out, or catch up on that latest episode on Netflix. Distractions come in, especially when you don't have like a boss looking over you. If you have someone who's watching your every move, if you work in some big corporation, you don't need these systems because the systems are baked into the company. These systems are more useful when you kind of have to discipline yourself. So what happens when you have the perfect system but you keep getting distracted? Do you get distracted? Do you ever come off task? How do you pull yourself back on? What kind of mind tricks do you use to stay productive?
That's a great question. And again, I think I'd emphasize this again. Like, I am certainly no perfect human, right? All of this stuff happens, and it happens frequently. One thing that's quite nice, if you do have this flexibility, is changing location. I think it's a term in remote work of location popcorn. You like pop around different cafes or something, because you've been sitting in the same chair for 5 hours. You're a human, you're a monkey. Like, dang, that is a near impossible task. So switching things up is really useful. The other thing that's, I think, a nice important catch is that if you just sit with that feeling like, I should be doing something else, or I want to go do something else, it actually dissipates really quickly. So what we'll often do is like, I feel this energy, I want to go do something, and you'll just, you'll start playing games, or you'll watch Netflix, and then 2 hours are just gone, or the whole night is gone, right? But if you actually just like stood up, got a drink of water, maybe did some like air squats or something, like it'd probably pass. And then it's only 2 to 5 minutes of your time gone. And that's why, again, the built-in break mechanism of the Pomodoro is probably the most important part of it. The fact that you stop and take a break. And again, we're not trying to be militant here, right? It's actually awesome if you want to take this stuff really seriously and just power through things. But the way I arrived at this was like, I just don't want a lot of stuff floating around in my head. I don't want to always have to guess what I do, because again, I don't want work to be that like all-consuming, all-stressful thing in my life, right? I just want to be able to show up, do some cool work that I like, and then go on my way and not have to worry about all of this stuff, right? So you don't have to be hard on yourself.
What do you use to track Pomodoros?
I just put a timer on my phone.
That's it? So no fancy app, you just use a timer?
No, well, I do still have a lot of my tasks find their way into the productivity planner, and it has those little circles to actually show how many you've done. And so I'll scratch those off for sure.
So there's a couple of apps that I use. I'm going to run through some of them, and then I'd love to hear what you're using right now. So one of my favorite to-do list apps is called Things. It's the third version of Things 3. This is for Mac. Very simple, very nice user interface. I really like it. For taking notes and capturing ideas, I use Drafts. Drafts has just brought out a desktop version for Mac, which syncs to your phone. It's beautiful. It's great. I just really like that. And for writing, if you find that you're a perfectionist when it comes to writing and you kind of struggle with that first draft, there's an app called Flow State where you can set the time that you want to write for. And if you stop writing for like 5 seconds, everything that you've written disappears permanently. So you have to stay engaged with the draft that you're writing. And while that might sound a little bit torturous or like you won't do your best work, you'll be surprised what you can write if you can think, you can speak, you can definitely write continuously. And yeah, it might need editing, but how good are you going to feel when you've written 1,000 words that are like okay? It's 1,000 words that are okay is much better than a 0-word draft that's perfect in your imagination. The other app that I use is Ulysses. think that's how you pronounce it. It's like a really beautiful app that's got a kind of minimalist mode. It's really good for long form articles. It's kind of like a pretty version of Scrivener, as I like to think about it, with a lot less features, but it's still a lot of features on there. Those are kind of the productivity tools that I use. I also use a magnet app, which splits my windows on my apps very neatly, which, a clean workspace, I just prefer. It's like having a messy room. You just don't feel as productive in a messy room. And then I've also started using Notion. Notion's a great app that kind of does everything. It's got spreadsheets in there and kind of Trello boards and stuff. What I use Notion for at the moment is learning. I think Notion's a great app for accelerating your learning, because you can create spreadsheets. And as a side note, I think spreadsheets are one of the best things you can have for learning anything. So if you think about learning jiu-jitsu, say there are 500 moves that you want to learn. They say that the basics of jiu-jitsu. How do most people learn? They go to class, they learn a random move that class, they forget it, and they go for 15 years, and then eventually they kind of know jiu-jitsu. Much better to write down all 500 moves that are the fundamentals, then in a spreadsheet, write down how many times you've drilled that move, how confident you are in it, and then you have a list. You can go back to it. And to learn anything, you need not only reps, but spaced reps. If I did 100 reps of anything today, that's good, but actually what would be better is doing 20 reps today, 20 reps tomorrow, 20 reps in a week, 20 reps in a month, 20 reps in 2 months. Because that spaced repetition helps us to kind of embody it and integrate it and apply that thing under the stress of life, or the arena that we want to practice it in. So Eric, what kind of apps are you using for productivity at the moment?
Yeah, one thing came up when you were saying that I think is getting echoed here, which is, when we work for a company and we work for people, we put so much time and effort into that, right? We make these beautiful presentations and we fly across countries, and you put a lot of work into that. You can put that like systematic work into yourself, right? And I think that's what we're getting at here, which is whatever it is you want to do, like you can just mastermind it, right? You can just work your way through all of it, right? Break down every goal into the smallest tasks, put those in a list, put it on the calendar, and do it. So I hope that comes across.
That's actually a huge thing that I think we do, and I think that helps us. We try to do it with 30 challenges to enlightenment to kind of like systematize spiritual learning. But one of the things that I did about 2 years ago is I sat down on my to-do list app and I thought to myself, how could I become the hero that I'm capable of? My own definition of a hero. And I wrote down the books that I wanted to learn, the Dharma talks that I wanted to listen to, the different types of meditation that I wanted to go into, the different kind of exercise selections that I wanted to improve in, the different courses that I wanted to do. For some people that might be like, I want to do the 10-week Wim Hof method, and I also want to do like 1 year of weightlifting, and I wanted to complete all of the packs on Headspace. You can break it all down into a to-do list and apply all of the productivity principles you're talking about now, but seeing yourself as the business, as the project. And if you could do that, it's going to be insane. Like the amount of growth that I've had since I've done that has been incredible.
Yeah, it really can't be underscored. And there's a nice saying that echoes this, which is people often underestimate what they can accomplish. They overestimate what they can accomplish in a day, but underestimate what they can accomplish in a year. Right? Again, and that's why the sustainable thing is so important, right? If you're designing a daily system, right, give or take, you have like 300 days a year to apply that, right? And so you have to be able to go for those 300 days. It has to have balance in it. But getting back to your question, about the tech that I use. Almost just taking that question there for a second. Something that's been really important for me to both developing and actually working with the system that we've been talking about is almost this guiding question of how little of an interaction do I need with technology, right? Because to your point, like I get distracted all the time. Growing up, I was tech obsessed, right? I just loved it, spent all my time behind screens, but that can be a dangerous place to be in, particularly if you want to be both taking breaks and doing really high leverage work, right? So my relationship with my technology has been one of how little do I need to do what I want, right? And I actually wrote a whole piece on this for HighExistence. It's called Intentional Technology, and it's basically this idea that there are people being paid hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to just suck in your attention and distract you and keep you on their page, right? And to your point, if you want to systematically work on your life, you probably can't be spending all that time on someone else's, right? And so, you come onto my desktop, you come onto my phone, it's empty, right? The first page has no apps other than like music and reading that lives in the dock, right? And it forces you. The same thing with my computer. There's nothing on the screen, no top menu bar, no dock, no folders or files on the desktop, and it forces you immediately to ask, what am I here to do? Right? Immediately, like, to check in and be like, oh, okay. And you can feel it. You can always feel that reflex to go open Facebook come up, but it's like a first line of defense, right? This forcing of, what are you here to do? And from there, right, I just search it, right? Am I going to write? Open my writing app. Am I going to, do some of the social stuff for HighExistence? In which case, I'll go to Buffer and do that. But it's really, these things are extremely powerful tools, but they can also be extremely powerful time sucks. Right, so getting super serious with that, to the point where. Point. The other thing is, like, particularly with my phone, like, there's not a whole lot I do on my phone, and it took me a while to realize that. Like, I don't actually do a significant amount. Like, if I want to actually do deep work and like write something of length or actually move quickly, like, I definitely can't do that on my phone, right? I need to do that on the computer, right? It's amazing at serving me up distractions. Like, if I want to stay on the social sites for 4 hours and cycle between Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and back to Facebook and refresh, but there was not a whole lot of ever work being done. So I just systematically deleted everything that wasn't a tool. So, like, I have basically the basic work dashboard on my phone, right? So I have email, I have Slack, I have ClickUp, this tool that we've been using that has a lot of potential. Actually, the thing I've enjoyed most about having on my phone recently is I put the Wikipedia app on my phone. Because, there's a large part of the work I do that's on social, right? That's on social media. And I hated that I always had this reflex to go and check those apps whenever I was on my phone. And so I asked, like, what would I rather be doing? Right? And it's, I want to learn about something. I want to read interesting things, right? And so I went, downloaded Wikipedia, saved literally dozens of like articles on whatever, and now when I'm bored, I just go do that.
So Wikipedia comprises a large portion of your reading time.
Yeah. I've slowly gravitated to podcasts. Just that's been fascinating, particularly when you're someone who works alone the majority of the time. You have this sense of actually like being with people in a conversation. That's quite nice. And so when I do read, it's often Wikipedia, which is hilarious to say, but it's I've quite enjoyed it. I think, if I had to sum this up, it would come back to this, what is essential for what you're trying to do. And if you're really honest about that, your phone will probably never come up in that answer. right? I need some sort of a task system, which is cool. If you want to use like the phone as the entry point, like that dumping ground, awesome. But if you're being like really serious and doing deep work, you probably need a web browser on your desktop and something to write with. And that's that.
On my phone, I'm just looking at it now. Things and drafts, which I've already mentioned, are compatible with phone as well as Notion. But what I'm seeing is also this app called Forest, which is a kind of an anti-distraction app. So basically, you open Forest, you set however much time you'd like to be in a distraction-free zone, and when you set the timer, say for 45 minutes, a little tree starts getting planted, and over the course of the 45 minutes the tree continues to grow, and if you exit the app, the tree dies. So that's a really good app if you find your phone distracting, so it's sort of like using the phone app as a way to stop you from using phone apps. It's quite clever, and it's one of the highest rated productivity apps in the App Store. And I found that when I read my Kindle or a book, that app is very useful for staying on track.
Yeah, and see, this underscored something really important for me, which is just be intentional. That's really all it comes down to, right? If you figure out the system that works for you is like you wake up, you have a coffee, and on your phone you review everything you're gonna do, and you set things up and you clear your inbox, power to you, man. Like, that's amazing. But the point is that you're doing it intentionally and not reflexively. You're not just bouncing around all the time, right? Because that's draining, it's confusing, it takes your focus away from what might be most important. So it really just comes back to be intentional about what you're doing, and often so much comes from that.
So I know that you're big into using systems for being as efficient and productive as possible. Have you done any kind of habit tracking stuff before? Is that something you're interested in?
Yeah, I have, and this actually echoes the theme that we've been speaking about earlier, like knowing, doing, being. I find that once they're incredibly useful to get started with, at least for me, to start a habit, because I'm checking in, maybe I'm getting a notification to like actually do the thing. But once it's become part of me, once the habit is formed, then it becomes quite annoying, right? It's like, I have to check this box off, and I lost my streak because I was out on Saturday and I forgot about this, right? Then it becomes a point of frustration in a way. And so again, it's knowing how you relate to all of these things. But yeah, I started this whole system through a habit app. It was actually like, wake up, plan your day. Okay, did I do that today? Did I, at the end of the day, like assess how I did? Did I actually review things, right? And then you check that off. And then it becomes ingrained in you, so it doesn't take up any bandwidth. You don't have to think about it. It's just part of who you are and what you do.
I find using habit apps to be very useful. They definitely have flaws in a way to using them. Like they can kind of make you frustrated, or you can get into this relationship with life that everything needs to be measured and tracked, which is probably not a very healthy way to go about it. But I would argue that if you find that's the problem, then just change that without needing to get rid of the app. Like, getting rid of the app is not necessarily the only way to stop that problem from occurring. You can just relax and use the app in a relaxed way. So the way I use habit apps at the moment is I use them to see trends in my life. I'm not into streaks, actually. I'm not a big fan of streaks because of that whole, like, I've done 35 days in a row, I'm 36, I didn't do it, I'm gonna feel awful, and then I might not get back on the streak, and then I don't think it's this kind of like binary way of approaching life is actually very healthy. So I use an app called Way of Life, and I just have a rule that I I almost don't even try that hard to hit my habits, but I track them anyway. So it's like, if I haven't meditated for 10 days in a row, that's fine. I'll still track that I didn't meditate. That's fine. What I'm looking for is, when I look back over the last 3 months, can I see any trends? Because if I meditated 70% of the time, I'm going to feel good about that. That's pretty damn good. To meditate 70% of the days, that's pretty good. I'm going to feel happy about that. If I meditate 60% of the days, I'm going to feel good about that too. But I'm probably going to go, let's focus on that a little bit more now. So it's more related to percentages. So that's how I approach habits at the moment, is that I usually have 1 or 2 habits that I'm really into, and I want to, I don't never beat myself up if I skip a day, but I want to kind of focus on them. And then I have a bunch of habits that I just track, simply so that I can see the large scale trends of those habits. And I think the act of tracking them just makes me more aware, more conscious.
Yeah, this brought up something that's been coming up a lot for me recently, which is, at the end of the day, like, this is your life. Like, you should enjoy this. This isn't this shouldn't be some burden that you have to like slog your way through, right? And particularly, I think a lot of these discussions about like hyper productivity, it always comes up from like the really high performer circles, right? Like, I'm a billionaire, how do I make even more money? But it actually doesn't have to be that. For the reason I like this is twofold. One is it clears up bandwidth in my mind, so I'm not constantly stressed, right? It's just so I don't have to think as much, right? And I actually have free time to go and sit and do literally nothing, or meditate, or learn something, or listen to the podcast, right? Mm-hmm. Just the other thing that came up is, right, this is a game. It's meant to be enjoyed, but much like if you were ever in a sport team or something, like growing up as a kid, it's actually really cool and really energizing to see just what you're capable of. Like, when you really dial in and focus and give like 100%, like, it's amazing to see what you yourself can do, right? And so striking that balance where it's like, this shouldn't be some obstacle to be overcome. It shouldn't make you feel bad, but like, man, you are capable of so much. And I know you would feel so good if you brought that to life, or like actualize that potential, right? You have books inside of you. You can save people's lives. You have charities. You have so much to give. And it's just it's an amazing opportunity that we have to actually be like, okay, what can I do and what can I bring into life?
I think that raises a really important point as well, because the way I see it is that the Buddha said, life is suffering. I think that if you look into the translation, it goes a little bit deeper than that. That's a simplification, but I think you can translate it more as life is unsatisfactoriness, or unsatisfactory, or some sort of. I think it translates as like a wheel with the axle is not quite smooth in the wheel, and it's like a kind of like an incongruent, bumpy ride through life. That's kind of closer to the Buddha's translation. But anyway, you don't get to avoid suffering, but you can choose, right? Like, do you want to be at the cause of your own suffering, or do you want to be at the effect of your own suffering? And this comes back to what you were saying earlier with the comfortable good and difficult great. I can choose right now my suffering. I can get into an ice bath, or I can go to the gym and I can run for 30 minutes. I can choose that suffering myself. Or I can not choose suffering, never choose suffering ever. I'll choose video games, I'll choose chocolate and ice cream, I'll choose binging on Netflix, I'll choose not working. Then suffering chooses me. Suffering then is, I'm at the effect of the suffering, because it will come. You will look in the mirror one day, you will see your friends who put in the work do well, and that envy that you might experience, and everyone experiences envy, could really just cripple you. So Yeah, this is something Jordan Peterson talks about. You don't get to choose. You don't get to not have poison, or a difficult time, but you do get to choose which one you have. And the comfortable good has a ton of suffering in later, and the difficult great has some suffering in now. Which one do you want to take?
Yeah, and this is just, it's so important, because we often we get into this trap of like, oh, if I can avoid this now, it somehow is never going to come, or I can skirt my way around it. It just comes in different forms. It comes in looking back on your life and being like, what did I do? Right? I had all this to give and I never did it. All those times I had to practice compassion that I never was nice to those people. And it's so immensely important to sit and recognize that point. Like, you are literally always going to be unsatisfied, right? And you can choose whether you want to be relatively unsatisfied or struggling through building up a blog or building your own company, or if you just want to be arguing with your spouse all day, right? Like, something is going to happen, and you get to choose. You get to choose which one. And, I think if you're being honest, you will often veer towards one. It's like meaningful suffering, right? It's meaningful because you're gifting it to people. You're gifting it to yourself and to the world. And yeah, it's really just a shame that, everyone, so many people around me live at like a 6 out of 10, like a simmering 6, never really going like much lower, which is good, right? No one wants to feel incredibly bad, but never raising much higher either, right? And I would give a lot of days of 3 or 2 to feel those days of like 9 and 10.
Yeah, I think that so I'd invite everyone who's listening right now to go into your body and just try and feel where you're at out of 10. Like, let's say like 10 is completely alive, aligned, present, enlightened, joyful, energized, everything that you would experience in a peak experience. And 0 is the worst day of your life. Where are you right now? And chances are you're probably there all the time, or most of the time. And are you okay with that? That's the thing about happiness, is the happiness does have a kind of a baseline to it, for the most part. Even if you get a lot of money, or even if something bad happens, you do kind of go back to that baseline. And I think probably, like, for people who are interested in self-improvement, it could be around a 7. I would say 7, give or take 6, with some peak days and some low days. But I do believe that it's possible to get to like an 8 or a 9 consistently. And if you ever experiment with retreats like Apotheosis, what you can experience after the retreat is that your whole like baseline seems to be higher. And it's not because you're doing anything different. You can just walk through the airport and you just feel like a new person. And everything is the same, but you're not the same. And when I was in Thailand a few years ago, I had this insight. I was walking down the street. I was in Thailand for the first time I traveled on my own ever. And every morning I'd wake up, chuck on some clothes, go find somewhere to eat breakfast. And I'd be listening to like audiobooks and podcasts as I was walking through these like little alleys in Chiang Mai. And I was like thinking, I feel so good walking through an alley right now. Like, this feels great. I'm walking through an alley. I can see rats running around. There's some garbage bags there. I'm really hot. The humidity is high, but I feel so good. And I realized how you walk down the street is how you walk through life. How you walk through the street is how you walk through life, right? Really, though, because, most of life consists of walking down streets, waiting for stuff to happen, waiting for your computer to turn on, replying to emails, listening to people talk that you might not think are the most interesting people in the world. That's life. So how can we get those parts of life to be as engaging and joyful as the most stimulating parts of life? Do you have any thoughts on that?
This is so incredibly important, right? You touched on the fundamental truth of hedonic adaptation, right?
Yeah.
We always come back to essentially a 6 or a 7. And again, like, how many billionaires need to come out and say that this happens to them before we actually believe it, right? Yeah. Like, I've met people who have gone through just disgusting things in their life, things I would never wish on other people, and to see them hold conversation with me just on an every day and smile and laugh, like, that is incredible. That is a feat of humanity, right? And it's also the same thing, right? The moment you get that car of your dreams and that mansion of your dreams, the yardstick moves once again, right? And is, why don't I have 3 of these cars? There are people in the world with 8 of these cars, and I only have 1, right? Immediately you're set back, and you come back to like a 6 or a 7. And oh my God, your point is so important that I want to like re-articulate it for people. The majority of your life is incredibly mundane. It's tying your shoes and riding the bus to work, and unless you can get comfortable in those spaces, quite frankly, unless you can get comfortable in the present moment, nothing else matters, man. Right? Because all of it, your life is like that. Even take the example of whatever your ideal peak experience is. Maybe you're snowboarding in Switzerland, maybe you're on a beach in Bali, right? What many of us will do, because we're not good in the present moment, is you'll already be thinking like, oh shit, when is this going to end? Right? Is there a way that this could be even better because it's so good? Even in your like ideal perfection, it's not, because you're not there with it. Right? You're already thinking about other stuff. You're lamenting when it's going to end. You're wondering how soon, again, next year you'll be able to come back. Right? And it's already lost. Right? You're doing it and it's already lost. And, this is why we can harp on this sometimes, but it's actually why something like meditation is so profoundly important. Right? If you can find not only like equanimity and peace, but actually a level of engagement and interest and excitement in sitting on the ground with your eyes closed in silence, and you can genuinely be at like 8, 9, or 10 states there, and you open your eyes, like you are suddenly immersed in this wonderland, and you can be in your room, right, and it's suddenly a wonderland of visual information and things to do and tools to use and projects to work on. Like, it's really incredible. But you have to train that. You have to train yourself to actually be like, wow, what I'm looking at right now is incredible. Like, the fact that I have a teacup here that I can hold and that humans figured out ceramics is nuts, right? Like, it's actually incredible. And it's such an important skill.
Sam Harris says that that a concentrated mind is the kind of thing inherent in all psychedelic blissful states, like whether you're talking psilocybin or ayahuasca or MDMA or even alcohol or marijuana. When you get really present on these substances, it's not the substance necessarily, it's that engagement with whatever is coming up right now. And how clever was the Buddha to realize that you could train your mind to become more concentrated, so that you could I think the idea is that the distracted thoughts that keep coming up are the things that make life grey. And if you can just train your mind to laser through that, even looking at a wall is a wonderland.
Yeah.
Which is incredible.
Like, oh, this is so important. Here's another way to look at it. So why do you want to make whatever your ideal salary is, right? Probably some sense of security, financial security, which does what? brings you peace, brings you security, and brings you calmness, right? Why do you want a relationship, right? Because you feel validated, and that will calm the waters of your needy mind, right? Everything that you're doing is in the pursuit of this peace and this inner stillness, right? You can actually, to your point, just forego all of that and just get to that point right now. And when that becomes regular, if it can become a ritual, right? Every day I wake up and I've sat still and already my day is fulfilled, right? This idea of like nothing to do and no one to be, then the whole world opens up to you. It's like, holy crap, I get to go on a commute in a car with thousands of other people to work in this crazy place. Like, even your morning commute becomes something truly astonishing. But it eludes so many of us, right? This notion of, stop thinking and lose all your problems, right? The mind is beautiful, but it's also very dangerous.
Yeah, the mind is a very powerful thing for good and for bad. I think the Stoics were genius in a way, because with the hedonic adaptation, what they realized is they kind of short-circuited the whole situation. So Nietzsche had this phrase amor fati, which means love your fate, and he said that is the formula for greatness, is to just say yes to whatever is coming up, to say yes to life, and to love your fate just as it is. If your life was to be repeated over and over and over again as it has been for eternity, you would want nothing to be different. That is amor fati. And the Stoics, how clever were they as well? Similarly to the Buddhist, slightly different way there. As to a Stoic, if a Stoic found himself or herself as a 6 or a 7, they, instead of trying to change that to a 9 or a 10, they would try to love the fact they were at a 6 or a 7, which would do what? Bring them up to a 10. So that's like so smart, to just train your mind to love whatever is coming up. Train your mind, you can do this. Like, you can be like, wow, I feel pretty ill today. Oh, this is so cool. What can I learn from being ill? Oh, I get to explore this part of my body. Wow. And suddenly the relationship to the suffering changes. And I think that's connected to gratitude, just being grateful.
Gratitude, huge. And also just the profound importance of curiosity, right? What is going on here? What can I learn? What can I feel? Right, again, something like sickness, like, where do you feel it? Is it hot? Is it cold? It suddenly becomes this whole game you get to play with yourself that you actually can't when you're feeling good, right? Oh, what happens to my energy levels? Maybe I'm more creative with my words because I'm not thinking as much, right? Can I try writing? Like, this whole world opens up the second you search for good questions and not just answers.
Yeah, asking good questions. I wanted to just ask you quickly, what was your impression of meeting the HighExistence team for the first time on Apotheosis 1? Because you mentioned earlier that you worked with us digitally for a while. You spoke to Jordan Bates first as your first contact. What was the experience for you like in coming on to the first Apotheosis retreat, the first one ever in Costa Rica, and meeting the HighExistence team, and just the retreat in general?
Man, probably the easiest way to sum it up is fundamentally life-changing. You have some sense of what the benefits of this work is, right? Like, if I can get more confident, or if I can be less anxious, who could I be and what could I do, right? And that was something big that came up for me upon the initial meeting. Was like, oh, okay, I see where this path could take me, right? All of our team just embodies the work, right? Like, Martijn has this laser-like focus, right? You also have this extreme just equanimity and like a fierce gaze. And it was like, oh, and then you get to learn, and it was like, no, I wasn't always like this, right? I had my own neuroses and whatever, right? And it's like, oh, so this this can happen, right? You can, through disciplined work, change your being. And that was very powerful. Something that comes up a lot, this a concept in the retreat, is this idea of a mirror, right? We often mirror or get things mirrored back to us based on where we're at, right? So if you're unhappy, you often see unhappiness in people. You see the ways that everyone can be unhappy. But for me, it was just this notion of an incredibly strong positive mirror, right? Everyone's seeing the best in you and almost waiting for you to step into that, right? It's like, okay, I see you as your best self, even if you can't, and I'm just going to wait here and edge you on until you can step into that. And that, I think, is what is really powerful about the container of the retreat, right? All these people show up here, only they know their entire life history, right? They know all the times they let themselves down. None of us do. We're only seeing them in the best faith interpretation and the person that they say they want to be, right? And it creates this environment where you get to test drive your ideal self, right? You get to show up and say, no. I was actually just talking to one of the attendees the other day, and he was like, no one knows me, so I'm going to show up and I'm going to introduce myself to everyone, right? Because that's the person I want to be, and no one knows me any other way, right? And so he did it, and now he does it at home all the time. He goes to like a yoga class, he'll introduce himself. Like a fundamental shift in his being through being able to have his best self mirrored to him and also test it out, right? Go from the knowing to the doing to the being in this enclosed safe container. And I think if I can just riff a little more on that, the retreat was an example of the world that we know is possible. That we know is possible when everyone shows up willingly in good faith and puts a lot of effort in. It's not easy work, right? It's very difficult, it's very challenging, but everyone shows up for themselves and everyone shows up for the group, and it's a truly magical experience, right? The depth of love and authenticity that I feel there, I've never felt in my life, all right? Just full stop. And with strangers, complete strangers. I don't know any of these people. Maybe some of them I spoke to the phone once to do an intake call, but like that's it, right? And you meet them, and it's just this overflowing of compassion and interest and engagement, and it's like, you feel it. Your fingers start to tingle, right? You light up. You see everyone light up, right? It's people who may have never been given that opportunity before in their lives, they show up and they burst open, and you just evolve this full like metamorphosis, and it's just beautiful.
So the first ever apotheosis was over a year ago now, and we spent 5 days, intense days, doing deep work with people on the retreat. There are some individuals who came on that retreat that I haven't spoken to in a long time, but I have no doubt in my mind, if I was in their city, I have a friend.
Yeah.
It's crazy, the kind of bond that you get. And it's not fake. It's not like, oh, I kind of know this person, they kind of know me. If I'm in their city, then I guess I could say hi. It's like, no, I know they'd be there and they'd hug me immediately, and we could just connect, of course. And that's like so epic, and that's been the case for every retreat out of the 3 that I've been on. Your point about the mirror, I want to use this thought analogy to help people understand this. What's more powerful, do you think? So this is scenario A. Imagine if I just told all the key people in your life, secretly, compliment this person and tell them they're funny. Just say like, you're funny, or you're funny, you're hilarious. They're exactly the same person. Don't change how you view them. But everyone's just going to tell you you're funny for the next 30 days. I'm sure there would be some sort of effect, okay? Imagine this scenario. I secretly go to all of your family and friends, all the people you see in work, and I give them like a kind of a brainwash pill, and I convince them that you are hilarious. But I say you can't tell them. They can't tell you that you're funny. you're going to be cracking crazy amount of epic jokes after 30 days of scenario B, because people are giving you the true mirror that you are funny and that you can express yourself. That's how mirrors work, and that's what's going on in the retreat. If I with you, Eric, I've always seen and still see incredible power and talent, and like I see all these things you can do that I can't do, and I'm like, wow, like this is awesome, this is so cool. And I'm always giving you this, even if we're talking about nothing in particular. It's always coming through. I'm always that mirror for you, and it's not fake. It's like, it's genuine. And I've learned to be like that, and consciously, because other people have done that for me, and it's like such a nice way of being, isn't it?
It's an incredible gift to give someone, right? The space to grow into the person that they can be, right? What better gift could you give to someone? This safe, like, outstretched hand, like, yeah, I see you, now let's do this. I can't do it for you, right? But I'm going to do everything I can to help you get there. You know, and this is something, your point about being able to go back into the city and see everyone and connect again. You know, this want or enjoyment of deep connection is fundamental to the human experience. Right, it's quite literally in our genetic code, right? The need to interact and engage. You know, it's very telling that the worst thing that you can do to someone in prison is put them in solitary confinement. Right? The worst place you can go to argue, in arguably the worst place in the world, is by yourself. Right?
Oh shit.
Like that's
true.
That's really an important thing to understand, right? We are biopsycho social creatures, right? Biological, psychological, sociological. We need people to be ourselves, right? We have to have things reflected back to us. There's a really interesting thing that happens to people who get Botox, like Botox injections in their face. They actually become less empathetic, because when someone smiles at us, we instinctively like smile back, right?
Yeah.
As a way of understanding how they are feeling when interacting with us. And if you have Botox, you can't do that, right? You can't mirror back their emotion, so you actually understand people less, right? Like this way of interacting with people is so deeply ingrained with us that, like, it's something we all want, whether we admit it to ourselves or not, that we want this deep connection, we want this deep sense of love, particularly with random people, right? You can get kind of jaded and say, like, yeah, my family's my family, they kind of have to love me, and my friends aren't going to go out and try to find new friends, right? We're old now, they're going to stick with me, right? But to have strangers come into our lives and to see us and respect us and love us is so powerful. And, like, the fact of the matter is that you can do that for people, right? Where is it written that you can't talk to people on the subway? Like, exactly. Point me to that law. It's just something that formed. And, you know, wouldn't it be nice if someone came up to you on the subway and was like, yo, what's your story, man? You look cool. I want to hear what you do. And they actually acted interested. Like, they actually showed up. Like, I'd be like, oh, cool. Maybe there are times when I'm tired and I'd be like, hey, sorry, man, it's not the time. But that would be amazing. You know, that's something you'd go home and you tell your spouse, like, yeah, this person came up and they spoke to me. Yeah. And, like, you can give that to literally everyone in the world, wherever you are right now. You know, go to a coffee shop, buy 2 coffees, turn around, give it to the person behind you.
And one of the ways that I love that so much, and that's something I've tried to add to my own life over the last couple of years. And just like a little tip for people who want to try this, and I really encourage you to do it. You want to add value without needing anything back. So if the person does not want to talk to you, or they kind of ignore you a little bit, they don't know you. You know, they have all this conditioning to kind of be guarded. That's fine. Give them love. You know, if they don't want to talk, send them love in your heart without saying a word. But if you do approach them and you want to do something, you don't always have to ask a question. You can just tell them your opinion on something. That's a really good way of adding value. Like, hey, I watched the new Spider-Man movie last week. I really like this, and this about it, but I found the villain a bit shallow. Have you seen it? I'm just telling you what I think. If you're interested, you can talk to me about it, and if you're not, you don't have to. I've actually experimented with this when I've done a little bit of social experimentation, and I've thought to myself, like, can I talk about something that has no real contextual value, but simply because I'm giving information about myself, it has value, sort of like by implication. So I walked up to people and I said the line, "I like salad." Like, that's the line. And they kind of look at you like, they smile and they're like, "Oh, really? Okay, yeah, me too." That's kind of the normal. And then I'll go, "Yeah, but I prefer chicken salad to fish salad. And I also like croutons too, but I'm not too fussy on tomatoes." So I'm just sharing in a very light-hearted way. People will respond so well to this kind of open sharing, and you'll often find the most extroverted people who just like happy to be vulnerable and to share stuff about themselves to other people. In contrast to someone who's like, I don't know, they want something from you. It's like, "Hey, do you live close to here?" That's much more of a kind of a taking perspective. If you're actually curious and feeling good in your own body, and you're actually like wondering that, you can ask that, and that will come across really well. But just sharing freely is so nice to be around. It's sort of like the warm sun that's giving off energy versus the black hole that's taking energy. The reason you're listening to this podcast now is because me and Eric are sharing. We're not asking anything from you at all. You can just leave right now if you want to. But there's something in you that's kind of like seeing value in this spontaneous sharing. So what's stopping you from doing that with others?
A really important thing here that isn't exactly obvious is that it takes a fair bit of work to get to the point where you can give freely without expectation. Right? Like, you could even try this with your friends. Ask your friend to, no matter what you say to them, act very negatively and very angry. And then role play this game of just like trying to be nice to them. It's actually incredibly jarring to have someone spit back like negativity to you when it's not warranted. And this is the fundamental separation between doing what you can control and not attaching to the outcome. Right? Because you could walk up to someone on the subway, try to be nice, and they could literally get quite angry with you. And there's a part of you that would probably be upset because, like, "Oh, you didn't validate my nice action." Right? Did you not see what I was trying to do for you? And all of that's the illusion, right? You were still secretly wanting something back. You wanted to feel good because you were doing something nice, when like a gift in its purest form, like, you're just going to give and they could smash it right in front of you, and that's not the point. The point is that your intention was to do something nice and you did what you could control. But it's a fair bit of work to get to that point. Because imagine, you can do it with, I'm sure this comes up for many people in their relationships, right? You do a few nice things, you do even more, and then eventually it gets to the point where it's like, you never say thank you. You don't seem very grateful. Do you see all of what I do for you? Right? And it was all because you were doing something nice because you wanted something back, right? You weren't doing it out of true authenticity just to give it to them. You wanted it to reciprocate and come back. And it's difficult. It's actually difficult to give something truly, like, purely from your heart. And so it even underscores the importance of just practicing it.
I also think that people talk a lot about confidence, high confidence, low confidence. How can I build my confidence? I think there's a direct relationship between taking value and having low confidence, and giving value and having high confidence. And you can think of it like this: if you were to do like a public talk for a group of people, the nervousness comes from, what do they think of me? That's where the nervousness comes from. That's where the low confidence comes from, as opposed to, what can I give the people listening? Because if you could just orient yourself towards the giving, like, I hope someone learns something. If someone learns one thing from this talk that I do, I'm happy. And you just give and you give and you give. You can't even tap into that nervousness. It's only when you start talking, you're like, how do I sound? How am I coming across? So then, is it really a talk for the people who are listening? or is this really just an act that you're doing so that you can get validation, and basically you're trying to take from the people listening instead of giving to them? It's a very strange relationship. It's kind of like buying something from a shop and wanting money for buying something. It's backwards. It doesn't make sense.
I even noticed this just in who speaks in a conversation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So many people speak because they want to be seen, right? They want the attention, or they want to develop their persona as being an intelligent person, rather than, am I actually adding anything of significance to this conversation? Am I actually pushing it forward in any substantial way? And I think if you orient yourself in that, you'll notice that you actually speak significantly less, right? You start listening a lot more, right? Because you're taking in, and it's like, okay, yeah, I know that's interesting. I never knew that, right? And you would never learn all these things if you were just always waiting for your turn to talk and always just trying to add something in. And yeah, if you start watching for it, right? If you start watching the underlying motivation, a lot of what you do is just for yourself.
Yeah, and it's a kind of a dirty kind of reason. It's not like a self-love. It's more like a kind of I feel a lack. Please, external world, fill it for me. In the social matrix as well, there are two skills to learn: the ability to express without needing any kind of reaction, and the ability to be able to listen and feel as if you were the one speaking. So a lot of people struggle with the speaking part. They maybe they don't speak up enough, or if they are speaking, it's kind of like this frantic effort to look at me, find me funny, validate me, as opposed to I'm going to express rather than impress. And on the flip side, some people struggle to just feel good not being the center of attention. Just feel good having your friend tell amazing jokes. Feel good when that's going on. Feel good being the quiet one in the group. Because I promise you something. If you can radiate positive energy from within, if you can draw a really pure, high frequency state from within without needing to speak and do anything, you will have a charisma that is so much more powerful than any words can give you. You're going to be like a gorilla in the rainforest who doesn't need to say a word, but you just have this amazing presence. Were you going to add something?
I was just going to say, you can sense that the groundedness of internal authority, where it's I am strong and centered in who I am. And if you would like to come and talk and dialogue and learn more and have me ask you questions, that's amazing. But I do not need to waver from this position in order to feel strong and centered in myself. And you can see it damn near immediately in people, right? It's really powerful. And it's also, again, very calm, right? It's a place of great inner strength to just know that you are enough by yourself. And again, anything that comes your way is a bonus, but not needed, not fundamentally needed.
Yeah, Cicero, the philosopher, he had this beautiful phrase, chosen but not desired. And I think that's a lovely phrase to keep in mind. You can choose the target that you want to aim for, but you don't have this neediness for it. It's a beautiful phrase. So Eric, we've covered a lot of topics in this, and I can't wait to do a follow-up with you and sort of recap on how the last few months have been. But I'm sure a lot of people listening to this will want to actually speak to you personally, maybe even meet you in real life and just hang out. What would be the best ways that people could connect with you, ask you questions, read some of the things you've written, etc.?
Sure. Probably the best place to start would be my HighExistence author bio. I'm pretty sure if you just search Eric Brown HighExistence on Google, you'll get a few results, and you can hang around there. People can find me on social. It's pretty much it's Eric Brown, ITS Eric Brown on whatever platform it is. Come say hey.
Mm-hmm.
I don't bite. I live in Toronto, Canada. If anyone's in the area, come say hey. And then, but I think the best place to meet all of us is come to an apotheosis retreat. It is a fundamentally life-altering experience. It shifted the course of my life, and I can't speak highly enough about it.
And if someone wanted to shoot you a message and just ask you for more details on apotheosis or anything like that, that'd be cool.
Yeah, of course. Eric at HighExistence.com.
Oh, like for your email?
Yeah.
Okay, don't spam his email inbox, please, people. Keep it clean. And the next apotheosis is going to be in February 2020 in Costa Rica.
Looking like
so
that,
there's lots of time to prepare for that if you're interested. And yeah, apotheosis is actually the place that I get to hang out with my best friends and teammates as well. Like, so I don't see really you at all other than when we're on retreat. And it's such a cool way to punctuate the year. Is there anything that's come up for you that you want to end things with? Any final thoughts, or do you feel like you've said enough?
One little thing that came up is, we talked so much about things that you could bring into your life, right? Adding on, look at all these systems and techniques and habits that you could try. The flip side is also just as valuable, right? Really letting go of things, really getting rid of things, right? You're probably carrying around a whole lot of shit weighing you down that you just don't need to. Whether that's physical things, emotional baggage, expectations, right? There's probably a lot that you have that you don't need, and it weighs you down. It affects how quickly you can move. It affects the quality of your day. So instead of just always searching for more, new, right? See what you can let go of, right? Get rid of, downsize. It can be just as powerful.
Space, silence, clarity, cleanliness. It's beautiful. It's precious. It's like having a bowl of like a really elaborate cocktail, like I don't know, like a sex on the beach or something, versus having just a bowl of still water. It's like it's not obvious which one is better, and maybe actually the water is far superior when you think about it. So how can you add more stillness to your life? I believe that people listening to this conversation, most people would have had quite a few insights, epiphanies, ideas for how they can start doing things a bit differently in their life. So I would definitely recommend getting out like a notebook or a journal and just writing down a few things that you can start doing today, this week. The 80-20 stuff, things that will have the biggest leverage to change your life. Because that's what we're aiming for here with these kind of conversations. Yes, it's cool to hang out and to get inspired, but I've actually learned a few things from Eric that I'm going to start implementing. And if you're on this journey with me, then I think it would be wise to do the same. So with that said, thank you very much, Eric. Until next time.
Dude, thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review, subscribe to the podcast. It's very quick, it's free, but it goes a long way toward helping us continue to grow and improve and get better guests and make the podcast as epic as it can be. This is a collaboration. Ultimately, HighExistence has always been a collaboration between us, the creators, and you, the readers. So thank you for listening, and I'll see you here for the next episode of the HighExistence podcast.